Before I start, just to say, I work for that project here, Surveillance and Moral Community. We are 4 researchers. We are based here at King's College, and each person is doing a different research related to surveillance and monitoring. And when it came, the word came about the AI festival, I thought, okay, that's quite interesting, because within my own research in the last year and a half, I've seen that, in fact, the whole field of surveillance, which is quite big, and it's not only from a security point of view, but also from mundane things related to machine vision and all kinds of things that are in the backstage of things that we do online, has gone through a significant and rapid change because of AI. And I propose this possibility to debate it. We are doing it in collaboration with the AI Festival, so thanks a lot for the AI Festival people in the organization, which has done a great job in putting this together. Now, the HAL dilemma, as most of you probably know, relates to Stanley Kubrick. I'll get to it in a second, and after me, Matt Adams will present a more comprehensive technical debate about AI, generative AI, and differences between different kinds of AI capabilities. So just briefly, I'm personally interested in the philosophical aspect of the AI, which we will not be touching today extensively, just a little bit later on. But the idea is that, well, it's difficult to actually define what artificial intelligence is. It goes deep into the idea, our ideas about logic, about mind, about consciousness, and so on. But you would be able to say that AI is basically giving machines the capability of solving problems that usually would require a human being to engage. And this is, I'm not going to get into the whole history of it, but just kind of in one sentence, it all came up from research into cybernetics in the 1940s. So AI actually is kind of a bit older than what people usually think about today when they think about AI. Later on in the 60s and 70s came the beginning of machine learning, and recently the idea of deep learning. And the difference basically between them is that machine learning is something that still requires constant calibration and auditing of humans, because you feed information into the machine more or less manually, whereas deep learning is enabling a machine to do it by itself. So it can go to databases online, open source data, all kinds of things, and learn from it. And as it is learning, it is changing its own capabilities. And that's from I'm not a technical guy, yeah, but from what I've read about the technology of it, it's basically they're trying to build something that reflects or imitates human brain neurology, yeah, which is quite exciting. And that's why it's a big thing, and that's why it's a big discourse, and that's why everybody's speaking about AI today. And it is being integrated more and more and more and more into nearly everything that we do online, and I think that very soon also offline. So how is this related to surveillance? I think it's obvious, but I kind of try to dig at it in 3 main points. There has been a paradigmatic shift in surveillance in the last few years. Things that required a lot of people and a lot of thought and a lot of analysis are now basically being automated through machines. And the advantage that machines have is, first of all, they do things in real time. They can analyze things very, very quickly. and then they can decide what to do. They would, for example, compare how a thief is supposed to move with a huge database that they have learned beforehand, and based on machine vision, they would be able to tell the difference between just a person that walked by in front of a store and a person that is actually intending through his body language to break in. And they would be able to alert the shopkeepers or whoever. That's just a very banal example. And machines can also respond to things. Yeah, it can be designed that if the machine identifies such and such threat or such and such risk, which is either physical or online, it could be related to malware and hacking and breaking into sensitive information and stealing information and so on. So it can create something in response. That's, for example, from my own research, I once had a really interesting conversation with a guy that invented, well, it's a company actually, and but he's the main guy behind the company. They invented a machine, an AI machine, that constantly scans GitHub, which is the database where you have basically all most open source codes in the world. And the reason that they do that is that apparently very often there are leakages. That's how he called it, leakage of code that is supposed to be protected, that is not supposed to be public, and then it is just basically stored somewhere online. And hackers, professional hackers, hacking today is already quite a big business. It's a corporation. It's not two teenagers sitting behind a computer. So they understand it, so they also scan GitHub to extract these kind of things. And apparently there has been some major companies, taxi companies, and I already gave a few examples which I cannot recall at the moment, but basically because of that they lost a lot of money, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So what they do is they scan it, and then the machine automatically sends an email directly to the person that is signed on the particular code that has been identified as a leakage. And then the person who has an interest in preventing the leakage has a direct alert about it. And then he can also speak with the company further and so on. So it's pretty amazing what monitoring and what tracking can do these days because of this intelligence. And this is not very intelligent. Yeah, this is almost a simple automation of events. So that's the reason that they put AI today in everything, in CCTV. Everybody know these things that come up on television every time that people speak about surveillance in China. So there's always this same thing that I think was taken from a kind of a road camera or something, that you see a lot of bicycle and people with green squares around their heads. Yeah. So so on, which is not just by the way, not just in China. It is facial recognition is now used ubiquitously everywhere. Border control here in the UK, for example. Biometrics are related to it, and all kinds of software like the kind that I just said. So how is all that related to Stanley Kubrick? Just a question. Everybody knows Stanley Kubrick's 2001? Yeah, I hope so. If not, go and see the movie. One of the best movies ever made, at least in my opinion. So the whole thing about the movie is that there is a supercomputer there, which is kind of a proto AI technology. It is, in that time, the movie is from '68. It was co-written by Kubrick himself and Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer. And at that time, they were basing themselves on science, but in the public sphere, these abilities that are listed down here were just fantastical. Nobody assumed that it would happen so quickly, or if it would happen at all. yeah, that a machine can talk to you back, like in the chat GPT or OpenAI, or that a machine could build on a huge database to create all kinds of images. Yeah. The machine is called HAL, HAL 9000. The way that HAL works is like, I would compare it to one of these apps that you have like a friend, like an imaginary friend in the app today that you can download. They can, how are you feeling today? Well, I'm a bit down, and yeah, well, don't worry, look at the flowers, and so on, because HAL is basically interactive, responding, and dynamic to everything that happens, and on the spacecraft that is the center of the movie, the spacecraft that is going to Jupiter. We do not know at the beginning what it needs to do there. I'm not going to tell you, so I'm not spoiling the movie, but I again encourage you to look. And HAL, so his monitoring activities are constant, and they move from, it begins with just taking care of all the systems of a spacecraft, what you would call today automatic driving, automatic piloting, to playing chess with the crew. Yeah, so it's everything connected. Now, at some stage, and that's the twist of the movie, they discover, the astronauts discover that he had done a mistake. And there was a computer that was not supposed to make a mistake. It was a computer that was supposed to be 100% mistake proof. So they debate what to do, and then they go into a space pod, which is it's kind of round and nice. They've done a really nice reconstruction of props there in the movie, and it looks pretty real, at least based on the what they call it, not Mission Impossible. I forgot. When I was a kid, there was this
Star Trek.
Star Trek, yes. Star Trek kind of aesthetics. And that precedes Star Trek actually, or it's about the same time that they started with the first sequence. Anyways, they sit there, they turn off the speakers, so the computer will not be able to identify the speech, which is one of the AI capabilities that he had. However, they are not aware that if you can see this red spot here, they are not aware that actually the machine is so sophisticated that it learned by itself how to read lips. And therefore, HAL understands that they want to disconnect it based on reading their lips. And then instead of like they are talking about HAL as a person, basically, in the entire movie, which is also a philosophical question rather than anything else, because it is a machine. But then he decides that, okay, he will not tell them anything, he will act as usual, but he will try to lure them into certain traps and kill them eventually. Now it works. So that's kind of, the dilemma is, I was thinking about this, yeah, and I said to myself, while I was thinking about it, and talking to myself about it, I was thinking, okay, I mean, there is a paradox here, because ultimately what HAL decides to do, he himself says it at some stage, that he wants to kill the astronauts because he wants to advance and make sure and guarantee that the mission of the spacecraft would be fulfilled. However, the mission itself is dependent on also that when they get to Jupiter, there will be a living crew there that can actually execute what they were supposed to do. But for HAL, the reason was, it could be just an excuse, and then then you would ask, okay, maybe he was actually lying when he excused why he wanted to kill the astronauts, and then think about lies and lying as a constituent of intelligence. idiosyncratic constituent of intelligence that can be developed by itself. Because the official excuse was, I will kill the astronauts and the mission will be complete, which for him was to get the spacecraft to Jupiter. However, and that's kind of also this duality in the movie, that actually he was quite afraid of losing his own life, losing his own existence. He did not want to be deleted and turned off. So I was thinking, like, okay, so there is a paradox here, and the paradox is that these kind of machines would probably be able to think that they are doing the right thing by causing all kinds of atrocities. It's also a bit of a kind of a marketing type of thinking with the dilemma itself. Because I'm not sure if it is a technological dilemma that that developers actually deal with or not. But for me, philosophically, it was kind of interesting to think. Now, let's say that it is becoming ubiquitous. That there is AI everywhere. It's just going to become more. If the machine is going to behave unpredictably, how can we guarantee that surveillance technologies will be used to actually detect and prevent risks rather than to intensify them? And in a more kind of populist kind of sense, that how do we make sure that machines do not come to the conclusion that they wish to, that killing us is the right thing to do? And so we have a panel here that I hope will be interesting to everybody. We combined several speakers, some of us coming from more humanities background, some are more technological background. There is a risk specialist as well. And the way that I want us to do it is more or less as follows. Now we're going to start the first session. It will include only two people, Matt Adams and Sanya Kovacevic, that they will be giving their own things. Then we will stop for questions and answers, maybe 10-15 minutes. We'll see if we can play with it. And then we'll take some minute break to stretch up. Then we'll do the second session, which will run as it is written here, only instead of Luca, which unfortunately could not come today due to an emergency, we will have Rob that will be presenting in the second session. We'll do another question and answers, and I would like, if possible, and we'll see how the time runs, to just leave a space for like an open debate, which is not question and answer, between the panelists and with everybody here. That's it. Just kind of to brainstorm collectively somehow towards the end. So I hope that we can dedicate for that at least 20-25 minutes, maybe half an hour. In the last 10 minutes, there will be Carmine will probably come back, and there will be an evaluation thing that they will ask you to evaluate the panel. I think that there is only one question, and there is a QR code that you will be able to scan and answer a question. So I'm done for now. Please welcome Matt Adams. Yours is here, right?
It's on Edge, yeah.
Matt Adams, as Carmina said, is a specialist on AI, and you're a developer as well, right?
Yes, yeah, I dabble. Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a professional developer, but yeah, give us a little introduction. But thanks very much for the crowd-raising introduction, Nathan. So my name is Matt Adams. I'm the head of security enablement at Citi, so a large financial institution. And in that role, I lead a team of architects and engineers to solve some problems at the intersection of security and emerging technologies. So the kinds of things we focus on at the moment are how do we securely adopt Gen AI as an organisation, and also what do we need to do to be able to capitalise on that as an organisation. So all the things that I, as a security professional over 20 years, think that perhaps we could have been doing better if we only had just a bit more time and a bit more resource. Gen AI seems to be able to enable some of those use cases, and so that's where we're really interested in kind of exploiting that. Today, I've been asked to give a bit of an overview on this subject, which I always come up against this dual aspect nature of AI time and time again. So in terms of just its raw power to be able to enable things like surveillance, and I think perhaps you've been a little bit pre-primed by Matan's introduction, but if I could see a show of hands, who thinks surveillance is a good thing? Who thinks it's a bad thing? And who's on team nuance? Yeah. That's fine. So I think it's always important to include the third team there. So we're going to explore both of these aspects throughout the talk. So in terms of the power of AI, what it's enabling us to do, and as Matan said, this goes back perhaps 40 years, slightly further, but in terms of more traditional AI and machine learning, certainly for the last 10 years or so, it gives us the power to analyse vast data sets, petabytes of data, huge, incredible volumes that either we weren't able to do before, or we couldn't because it just wasn't feasibly possible. And not only is it the fact that machines don't particularly need to rest, it's also that they're amazingly good at pulling in all of that information and being able to look across that as a collective set. So trying to stuff everything into a single human brain, or even across a team, and get that detailed analysis is very difficult. But when you put that into a big data context, it becomes very powerful indeed. But that comes with some challenges. So because we're able to do that, and machine learning can do that, we can begin to start to profile individuals based on their existing digital footprints. And I like to think of this as almost like a jigsaw puzzle. So somebody gives you a jigsaw puzzle, but they only give you 50% of the pieces. As a human, it's going to take you maybe a bit of time to work out which bit goes where, and eventually you'll build up a bit of a picture. If you've got a machine learning model that's trained for that express purpose, it will do it very quickly, and it will have the edges in the right places, where you've got a few more pieces, maybe in one corner, it will have filled that out. And then when we go on to the last point on that slide, it can also start to fill in the bits that weren't in the bits of jigsaw that I gave you. So drawing inferences, sometimes sensitive inferences about individuals or organisations that you wouldn't necessarily immediately jump to. And there are some examples of, I think this was probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, where there was a woman who was shopping at Target in the US, and she received a voucher for baby formula, and this was before she had the opportunity to tell her own parents that she was pregnant. But yet the retailer, through its machine learning models, had worked out through what she'd been buying, and perhaps even what she'd expressed interest at on their website, that it was likely that she was pregnant. So it allows us to draw these inferences even when we don't have the data available to us. So some examples, some of you might not necessarily consider these like surveillance, but I've drawn a fairly broad scope here. So we've got just basic tracking of online activity, so using a web browser, your history, this could be your internet service provider. So what you might not appreciate is that as your computer goes to a website, it looks up an IP address, and your internet service provider, just through having to serve that content to you, will become aware of what that IP address is and will be able to resolve that back to the website. So they won't necessarily see the content of that website. So if you're going to Gmail, they won't see the contents of the emails, but they will know that you're going to Gmail. The next category then is a bit more involved, so behaviour and insights for business. And this is where you're using services like Spotify, Netflix, online shopping outlets, and you're actually giving them the signals there. So by clicking, I like this song, or 2 thumbs up to a particular film, you're giving the algorithm there the ability to suggest, to your benefit, things that you would like to see more of. And also, let's not forget, it's to Spotify's and Netflix's benefit, because they want your attention so that they continue to use the service and enjoy it, or there might be some ad-powered service behind it, and they're getting revenue for that as well. I think Matt touched on this last bit, so taking it into the real world, if we think about AI or ML in public spaces, there are examples in the US of stadia, so for concerts and other events that have been run, where some of those events have actively, security at those events have actively looked for individuals that they do not want to be inside that venue, and they are using facial recognition at a considerable scale, based on just a profile photo of some individuals, to quickly identify them in a crowd and remove them from the scene, which is a little bit concerning. But also, obviously, we can use it for beneficial purposes. So, if the police can identify that certain areas of a city are overcrowded, perhaps there's been a large concert or something like that, and they're trying to move people into safer areas, then being able to quickly sort of count heads, not necessarily faces, or identify people, but using AI and ML for that can help with just like public safety considerations behind it. So taking this into the workplace, this was a recent example that I found when doing the research for this talk, which I thought was very interesting. So there's a company, I won't name them in this talk, but they're using natural language processing and NLP models to analyse the text and images that employees share within internal communications channels like Slack or Microsoft Teams. And the reason why they're doing this is to evolve the, I don't know if you've been involved in these, but there are engagement surveys that are sent out in large organisations to just take a touch point across an organisation of tens or even hundreds of thousands of people. And it might just be a quick 5-minute questionnaire on how do you think things are going, do you feel you're being recognised, those kinds of questions. And that's used to take a temperature check across the organisation. Well, this company is looking at the kind of general chatter on Slack and Teams to assess whether that's generally positive, negative, if it's in response to a particular policy change that's happened, or maybe a change in leadership. And they're then looking at the aggregate of those communications and then feeding that back to company management. They do, however, also offer a tool that will specifically flag the names of individuals that they believe are breaching company policies. So you could easily tie that mass kind of surveillance capability to the individual flagging as well, and I think that would be, an interesting offering if they did combine that. And that obviously raises particular concerns around employee privacy and their autonomy, and just like the chilling effect, so feeling like you can't talk even on a Slack channel with your colleagues in the same way that perhaps you would do in person around a water cooler or in another setting. So it's not going to make that a particularly nice environment to operate in. If we move away from kind of traditional AI and ML and bring it right up to date with generative AI, this is a really interesting open source project that was released from a researcher at a cybersecurity company called Abnormal Security. They normally look at emails in the same way that, so essentially it's a group of people who used to work for Google, and they're using the same technology that Google uses to look through emails and find keywords that relate to things that perhaps advertisers want to sell to you. This team looks at emails for signals that indicate phishing attacks. So not bad spelling and grammar and really simple stuff that we've been able to look at for 5-10 years or more, but very subtle signals over thousands of different data points per email. And so that's the kind of history of abnormal security. This researcher has then developed this tool, LLM OSINT. So OSINT is short for open source intelligence. It's big in the security community. It's essentially using existing channels like LinkedIn or just doing a Google search of somebody to be able to find out intelligence or information about them. So you we use it a lot to look at perhaps organisations that or criminal gangs that will be targeting organisations such as City, and the sort of know your enemy kind of thing. You can use open source intelligence to do that. This tool, though, doesn't just do the kind of basic data gathering. It can then synthesize output on the back of it, and that's where you get things like it doesn't just go and gather information about this individual in this case. And this is all automated. So just given a name, it will go and research their LinkedIn profile, their GitHub repos, anything else they can find about it online, which is incredibly powerful. But using the generative nature of the language model, it will also have a good stab at making some guesses about what type of Myers-Briggs personality that person has, or the examples I've given here, a psychological report highlighting that individual's strengths and weaknesses, or even crafting a convincing phishing email that it can put together because it knows typically who the person will interact with, what they might be interested with, and you can see that here on the side. So I think eventually on this demo page, the email that's crafted was talking about this individual's technological background, and that was the angle they were taking to get them interested in clicking on the link. So clearly I think we have some considerable threats to privacy as a result of these technologies, because we have these invasive surveillance risks. As I talked about before, AI and ML enable these constant scanning, never resting approaches of analysing data. But I think we also need to be mindful of the potential for just manipulation of individuals through through those inferences that AI is able to draw. And there's also the potential that we could reinforce existing biases against individuals. So if you think about the example of somebody walking by a shop and deciding whether they might decide to rob that shop, it might not be based on their physical movements, but it might be based on their physical attributes as well in some way, and that's something we need to be very cognizant of. I think increasingly now we're getting to the point where the models are getting so good at filling in those missing jigsaw puzzles that it's very difficult to maintain a level of anonymity online, and perhaps maybe we could do 10 years ago, unless you are taking very extreme measures to cover your tracks. And so thinking about how we might cover our tracks, or how individuals might go about that, AI not only gives us that surveillance capability, but it also gives us a deception capability, and quite a powerful one. So what I've been thinking about is how we could use technologies such as large language models to impersonate individuals and create realistic interactions online. So effectively you create a fake online persona, and somebody's, or actually there are a number of online people on TikTok and other platforms who are selling online girlfriends, where they're commercializing this ability to create a fake personality. Here I'm suggesting you could use it to create another version of yourself, but just to perhaps create some additional noise in your profile, your online profile. So you can do this in terms of interacting with chatbots online, creating social media profiles, to give different narratives and maybe throw the surveillance models off the scent. You can even now start to do things like automated browsing, and so it would simulate you visiting a website. You could be off, you could be napping, having a sleep, whatever, and then your AI counterpart could be clicking on the websites that perhaps you think or someone thinks that you should be going to, but actually you're free to go off and do something else. So this is an example of that last case. So this is a tool called Open Interpreter. It's very recent. It's an open source project, so you can go and play around with it. But this is an example of an agentic model. So we talk about large language models. When we give them agent capabilities, it's really talking about giving them tools and the ability to work with, with tools to interact with different services. So this is just the setup of the tool. Here, though, I've given it a task. So I've asked it to pick 3 websites at random and open each of them in a browser tab. And I haven't touched the keyboard after this point, so you can see here, sorry for the slightly jittery things, I'm doing this in a virtual machine because giving something like this access to my main development machine felt like a risk too far. But you can see here that it's generated a list of websites based on the most popular ones. It's then going to write some additional code to open those in a browser on this machine. And it'll say these websites have been opened in separate tabs, and it will go and do that. Again, it's a slightly underpowered virtual machine, so it's a bit slow. But you can see there that it's gone ahead to open up Amazon, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And taking that a bit further, you can browse through those pages, you can click on different things, you can have an entirely kind of simulated browser session that sort of looks and feels like a person is doing it.
How much are you making a month?
Oh, it's not my tool, it's an open source tool. So actually, just what I think about it, so it's still very early days, and that model isn't, well, that tool isn't going to get any worse. The models aren't going to get any worse at doing those kinds of things. There is an operating system module within that tool that will completely interact with your local operating system, so it can open PowerPoint and all sorts of stuff, or move files around. That is a bit fragile in terms of its ability to work correctly all of the time. But for basic tasks at the moment, that's sort of where we are. But I think in a few months we'll easily have nailed the operating system challenge as well.
You said we, are you involved in the development?
Sorry, no, I just mean like general. No. It's not my tool, it's one that I've just picked up. Just as a technical community, that's where I think that people will be able to. So this clearly has some quite interesting implications. Yes, it can enhance privacy, but it clearly offers tremendous potential for misuse and the ability to conduct fraudulent activities with these kind of fake online personas. And I think we're going to find ourselves, if we're not already, in this sort of arms race dynamic where something that I'm familiar with over my cybersecurity career is that defenders get better, attackers evolve, defenders get better, attackers evolve, continues. And I think we'll see this again with just AI fighting AI across the internet and other systems. And so I thought I'd wrap up with having explored those two aspects of just some ethical considerations and really some policy considerations as well. I think there are good steps being made already, so the AI Safety Act in the UK, the EU AI Act that's going to be rolled out across the EU, but where I think the challenge lies is embedding all of those ethical principles across almost all of our different aspects of life. So AI is pervasive, or it will be. I don't think we need to think about it as a siloed technology. And we need to balance those benefits. So I'm a big proponent of AI. I think it can do amazing things, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, things that we've not been able to do before, but there's obviously a need to balance that with the implications and the potential drawbacks of it. And I think one of the best ways that we can do that and have a more informed discussion is by having sessions such as this one and promoting digital literacy, making people more aware so that AI isn't sort of a big scary thing, but we're a lot more in the team nuance space rather than being kind of having that immediate reaction of yes, this is a good thing, or no, it's not. And so in conclusion, we've looked at the power of AI for online surveillance, and we've explored some deception techniques and that ability to generate your own digital decoy, and we've also explored some of the ethical and policy considerations for the use of both surveillance at scale, but also creating your own online replica through these tools. So I hope you found that informative. If anyone wants to scan that QR code, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to take questions, and I will be around afterwards.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Thanks. Amazing. Now we will hear Sanja Kovacevic from the University of Stavanger, who is working on risk in different capacities. I forgot to say earlier that Matt works for as head of security, right? In City.
So I introduced myself as.
Yeah, all right. I guess I was already. Please welcome Sanya.
Thank you so much. I should find the slides one.
The PDF.
Yeah, they're PDF.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so hello, my name is Sanya Mrkšić-Kovačević, quite a complicated surname, isn't it? So I usually spend the most of my time on the first slide for some reason. I like it to be nice. So this time I did the same, and this is actually 3 buildings in Sandnes. It's a town near Stavanger in Norway, where I'm coming from as I'm working at the University of Stavanger. And actually, when I was searching for the photo, I realized that it was the architects that are behind these buildings are actually partly from Stavanger, partly from London. So in the end, it was a perfect fit for today. So I'm coming from risk field, and I'm dealing with risk communication and uncertainty communication mostly. So for me, when Matan said that I would be welcome to come, I was very enthusiastic when I saw who the speakers are, and I was like, okay, I can provide perhaps some insights from some of my perspective, or maybe even step out a bit out of it. Okay, so to start, so AI in the architecture, or engineering and construction field, as in all the fields basically, it comes with great potential. It has a lot of promises to tackle down some challenges, of course, in this AEC sector or field or industry, whatever you prefer. It comes, of course, with promises of dealing with the labor shortage, dealing with energy efficiency, productivity, better use of resources, and so on. But some of the examples of its use are industrial robots for the construction site automation, then building information modeling when it uses machine learning, so different versions of it exist, and building information modeling, or BIM, is actually a very, to say, widely used software within the construction field. And also drones for site inspections and so on. So for example, between Denmark and Sweden, we have that famous Öresund bridge that basically connects Copenhagen and Malmö, and there we have drones that are being used for the maintenance reasons, and it's actually coming from risk perspective, that's excellent, because we will not lose people in case of any accident. We will lose a drone, because they are basically going and inspecting the bridge and seeing whether there is a need for maintenance or not, which is brilliant from that point of view. Of course, it comes with its challenges on the other side, naturally. So just to give a bit more of the context, so architecture, engineering and construction field is one of the largest economic sectors in the world. And it is one of the slowest to digitalize and innovate. And why is that? So we have several reasons in it, but we know that that sector constitutes mostly of smaller businesses. So about 80% of the sector actually contains small businesses, and they are known to be slower in digitalization and innovation. And on the other hand, we know that in this sector, the cost of infrastructural projects is very high. So projects cost a lot, and that leads to raising costs if there is any kind of error or delay within the project. Another issue when it comes to digitalization and also the introduction of AI are privacy, then protection, then lack of common data standards, data security and ownership. And also we know that the development of surveillance and information systems raise concerns about privacy in addition and freedom, also in other sectors, but also in this sector as well. So when we reflect a bit on the risk perspective, we know that we have always, and we do that daily, we have that risk-benefit analysis that we conduct on a daily basis. So we see if some action is well, if it brings us more benefits or is it more on the risk side? And we decide to act upon that. So for example, today I came out from the hotel and I was thinking, well, maybe I know like a car can kill me, but I'm coming to this lecture and it's very cool and, or lecture, sorry, to this festival, and it's very cool and yeah, I can go and come here and that is fine, I can deal with that risk of being hit by a car, for example. And we deal that on everyday basis. When I say that, I also think, for example, we all have mobile phones, and we know that mobile phones are not maybe the best for our health, and some studies, some scientific studies have proven that, but we still tend to sleep with our mobile phones and we keep them, because it's kind of, we have the alarm ringing in the morning, and they are so practical, and we don't know how people before that used to wake up in the morning or something. And then we have, on the other side, we see that there is too little progress has been achieved in improving the understanding of AI and AI algorithms within different stakeholders. And we noticed that through many studies, for example, conducted in the risk field, we did one exploring the use of AI algorithms in medicine, and basically, stakeholders are not knowledgeable enough about the use of AI, and I think that in this, what I will show you a bit later, you will also draw some conclusions for yourself. And we need more and better risk communication, better uncertainty communication about, so to say, like, despite the complexity of the topic that is being talked about. And we heard already by Matan and by Matt, like, AI is very complex and it's very nuanced, and therefore we still need to communicate risks and uncertainties right, and to acknowledge them in the right way. So what I will be presenting more deeper, it's experts from a study that we did on the use of AI algorithms in the sector, and a small follow-up that we did. So what we did, basically, we had approximately, it was like 22 respondents from mostly from Europe, from this sector, and they were mostly engineers, so they were working on engineering positions. We did 2 pilot interviews where we actually got feedback that it is better to talk to different types of people in different positions, because that way we will get better answers than to aim for example, people working on a certain position, because those positions can vary between a in between a company, in between a region or a country, or similar. So some answers that we received, they were for us surprising. So we wanted to see how are they using AI, are they using it in their daily practices, how are they feeling about the surveillance issue, how are they feeling about AI being part of their everyday practices in the future, in the near future, or in the more distant future. And some of the answers were, for example, this was one respondent that said, well, AI will undoubtedly arrive, and quickly, most likely within next 10 years, after I retire. It was a more senior respondent, and then we talked a bit about what are the tools that he's basically using on an everyday basis. And we realized that he actually is using AI on his daily basis. They have some kind of software that basically works a bit in some direction as ChatGPT. So basically, it provides some answers, and mostly it's like paraphrasing services and similar, because he is working with some report writing and similar. So for him, that is of great help. And then we talked and we explained, but that is actually AI. And he said, oh, is that also artificial intelligence? But that isn't considered the real, the AI, isn't it? And we said, well, it is basically. So that was kind of interesting, and we spotted that with most of our respondents, and they were working on different positions, and they were, like, so to say, like, different levels of seniority and different levels of their careers. But they're basically pretty ignorant of their use of AI on a daily basis. They mostly related the AI with, I don't know, like self-driving vehicles, some robots that will, for example, come to the construction sites and maybe exchange workers in some of their daily tasks or similar. So that was their perception of AI, and not like maybe some more subtle uses of AI. So what we detected as promises and pitfalls of AI surveillance, to be more concrete in the sector, was on one hand, it's very positive and it comes with great promises when it comes to site monitoring. So for them, for example, the idea of having AI helping with construction site inspections, with monitoring, for example, the workers, the physical workers in the construction sites, and helping to raise productivity, helping to minimize errors, helping from, for example, from the risk perspective to minimize risks. That was an excellent use, and they saw there a huge potential of AI. On the other hand, also for material and equipment tracking. So in architecture, engineering and construction sector, they deal with a lot of very costly equipment. So they were very happy with the idea of following the equipment better, making better use of equipment, being more productive in those terms, and also like having better use of material. So that was kind of like a very positive side that they pointed out or underlined. But also what they mentioned is that it could lead to data security issues, to privacy issues, to over-surveillance and accountability and question of accountability. So who is actually responsible if we have, so say, like a mixed work of AI and a human? And that was kind of a question that was raised. I will come to that one more specifically. And also the question of informed consent. So what is the consent that, for example, employees should sign? So it's like, for example, like, okay, I'm giving my informed consent to be recorded. Great, excellent, but is that enough, or does it need to be something more? And what is actually enough in that case? So one respondent said, but even with the previous program that had no indications of AI, we had a lot of concerns with where the data would be stored, which is fairly available data for their company, right? And we almost couldn't control it. So what will happen now if we have AI stepping in? Will it change? Will it be perhaps better, or will it be, so to say, for worse? Because they used a rather simpler software to follow all their operations within, so to say, a medium-sized construction company. And now, like, he expressed his worries in a sense like, okay, so but what will happen now? Because they had difficulties in processing the data and following up, like how, for example, for some reports, how the data comes down and how it's actually put together. So then one other response said, about 3 years ago, we introduced headsets to our construction workers, and we've seen that this leads to a higher level of compliance with safety standards. However, we are deeply concerned about data privacy. So when it comes to those headsets for construction workers, when you have construction sites and you have construction workers before, for example, people who are working on those heavy operating machines, they would go outside, they would speak directly to the physical workers and vice versa, and the engineers, and they would agree upon like how to, for example, do an excavation or similar according to the projects that they all have insights in. But now, like, they have headsets and they communicate via headsets. So basically, everything that needs to be communicated in terms of what needs to be done throughout their working hours is done via headset, which of course it's recorded and it is used sometimes for inspection in case of some error or in case of some, for example, working accident that occurs. So on one hand, they were, so to say, happy about the effects because they raised the safety standards were more paid attention to, but they were deeply concerned about their data privacy. And then one said, well, but I work on my projects during the day, and that was an interesting one, I would say. When my AI robot friends continue to work on things they can complete until the next working day. And I was in charge at first, but I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. It produces a great deal of stress. So basically what they have in that company that person comes from, they have a software that basically gives them different tasks that they need to do throughout the day. But they have AI support, and basically those AI robot friends, and that person mentioned, so basically they have like, it's their name, and then it's like robot 1, robot 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the robots work during the night, and that person works during the day. And actually, that person provides, say, information for the robots for AI, and it feeds them throughout the day so that they can do better job throughout the night. So basically, like in a way, provides prompts for the AI. And then the AI works throughout the night. So in a sense, that person said, like I just feel so stressed. I actually, when I come to work, I'm thinking, have I done a good job? Or maybe I did not perform well, or so on. So it's kind of like putting a large amount of stress. And that was an interesting point for us to somehow have a look at that. And also, one more example is one person stating that they have a habit of reading the news at work for, so say, 5 to 10 minutes per day. And it's not affecting their productivity. That's how they stated it. But however, they now have an AI assistant who monitors their activities and advises them how to be more productive. And that person said, well, I don't feel like it's working because I feel that I'm constantly being watched and that all my activity is being traced, and I'm not sure how that can be used will it be used for the good, or will it be used for the bad in a way? So those were, to say, like some interesting moments, and I will just refer to what Matan said in his introductory talk, when he said that in the movie they were referring to HAL as a he. Well, I had, I think, 3 respondents here who were referring to their software that they are using at work as a he as well. So they had that feeling, that person that was talking about in the first about this, like AI assistants or AI robots, the person before, when we started the interview, that person was also mentioning, they and that, like that robot one is monitoring this or that. So it's kind of like they have that impression that it is live person that is next to them, and that's kind of an interesting point of view. And also, like, this relates to what Matt was mentioning about thought crimes, in a sense, like, okay, so is this, for example, reading the news, would that be considered something like that is not acceptable? And what kind of news was that person reading? Would that be somewhere, so say, signed as not appropriate, or would it be appropriate, or would it be not even considered at all? So what would be the case in the future, especially? So, to conclude, some take-home messages. So, what we discovered in this study that we did, we saw that there are a lot of privacy data and other issues that are out there in this sector that we had a look at. We also had another study that we conducted in the medical field, where we were investigating AI algorithms from the perspective of uncertainty communication, and there was an interesting response, and I think it's kind of interesting to mention because it relates to the previous talks in a way. We had one health expert from Denmark who said that because we were investigating medical AI algorithms, and he said, well, algorithms can kill people. But he said, well, medicine can kill people too, so it's a matter of perspective and how we are, so to say, what's the point that we are, so to say, like taking into consideration when thinking of AI and using AI. That risk-benefit moment that I mentioned is, I just put the question, could it deceive us? In a sense, like, are we really, so to say, good risk assessors that we know to assess risks in the right way? So would we be sometimes thinking that, well, AI is really helping us, whereas it is harming us, or vice versa? Maybe sometimes it would be, so to say, having panic attacks. Okay, I've been watched, I've been like, I have like surveillance over me and so on. Maybe it's not so risky per se. And then I wrote here what the interpretation HAL, because this was one of suggestions coming from the field. of EC, where they said, because they are dealing a lot with standards, and for them standards are, so to say, a safe harbor. When you mention standard, then they feel a bit safer. And they said, okay, but maybe if you have standards in use of AI, and if we try to standardize it, will that help? And well, that's a question which we can have or touch upon in the discussion. And does this raise the need for more risk science? Well, if you ask risk scientists, yes, it does. And there is a lot that risk science can offer in those regards on how to assess risks, and there is a lot of knowledge out there in the field that could be of use in those regards, but we can discuss that a bit later. So to conclude, thank you so much, and this is my QR code if you want to add me on LinkedIn or contact me, and this is the campus of Stavanger. And I will just finish with one last slide. This is AI responding to my prompt. Please show, please create an image including HAL 9000, Stavanger, Norway, and Fjord, and this is the result. It's not Stavanger. So, well, I like to judge. Okay, so thank you so much. Looking forward to the questions.
All right. Thanks a lot. Amazing. So we can take maybe 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll take 10 minutes break, and then we'll come back for the second session. This particular session was about how AI might impact surveillance in different ways, and the second session will go towards how surveillance might impact AI. Okay, I was going to kick it off, but you can just say, as a comment to Sanya, that this notion of risk science is really, really hot now. Just last week there was a letter written by, I think it was published in the magazine Science, by some of the most important AI developers and persona in the world, saying that you know, we have risk science and very clear security issues for nuclear power and for you know, food safety and so on, but there is nothing about AI these days. So a lot of people from different directions are now pushing forward this idea of legislation based on risk science. So it's a really important pragmatic aspect of this entire debate, even before we get into all the philosophical questions. All right, I had two questions, but never mind. This gentleman here would like to begin.
That's been very interesting. I'm interested in what the balance will be going forward. I mean, I used to run the IT for a small bank, and we took over Swiss Life as a manager, and they were actually keeping tabs, without AI as it happens, but they were closely monitoring all their staff all the time, and to an extent inducing the sort of stress. And the chief exec came to me and he said, you know, this is unacceptable. It's stressing these people out. They're high value employees. And you know, we shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. And I had to explain to him that we could, just as a whim, I could press a few keystrokes, and I demonstrated to him that I could monitor his PC and every single keystroke he input, because it would have been wrong not to. And of course, we were recording all his phone calls, including for various reasons on a phone that actually had written on it, this phone is not recorded. That's a different story. And I suppose the question is, what is the new balance between surveilling people and stressing them out? Because I do pick up this idea that workers are some sort of passive 19th century Marxist heap of people who just get exploited. But we live in a labour market. I mean, you work at City. Those aren't cheap people. If you were to lose any appreciable number of your people through something you did, they'd get sad with you, wouldn't they? And obviously you have compliance as well. And learning things about people is an absolute nightmare. If you know, there's certain forms of discrimination we can do, because I can look at you and discover things I might choose to discriminate. But I look at you, and you might have various things I might discriminate, you might not. But if I know these things, I can now do discrimination. And when they come to sue me, you can say, oh, they knew you had this health condition, you had this gender identity, which I never would have known or cared. But it's now on a system. Yeah, so I'm just interested in where the balance is ending up with, and at the moment surveillance is increasing, but there will be a pushback, because if a firm was doing the stuff to me that you described, I'd take my valuable skills elsewhere. Just walk.
Well, thank you for the question. And it's a very 1 million pounds question, I would say, finding the balance between. But I would say there is a balance to be found. But for example, in this sector that I was talking about, what we discovered was that education was a very important challenge in a way, because they have different positions and different educational levels. And speculations on the use, for example, of AI were different between different positions and different groups of employees. So then also like educating employees and letting them know and be transparent. And from, for example, from our perspective, from the risk science, we would say it's very important to communicate risks and uncertainties well. So in a sense, it should be all more transparent to some extent. Of course, if you dive too much into that and provide too much information, then we encounter different issues. But people need to know that they are, for example, being monitored on one hand, and what and why are they being monitored, and how is that information going to be used? And if you're consistent with that, that should be, I think, fine, because I think that, for example, in this case, people were mostly concerned about misuse and about, for example, oh, but if they catch me reading the news, will they see which titles or which headlines am I reading and then judge me upon that? Or will they just be looking at whether I read news for 3 hours of my working day or 10 minutes of my working day? So I think that that would be my answer.
Would you like to respond, Matt?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is where I always like to draw a comparison to what is it that we do today. So one of the key problems I think that we have when we let people surveil other people is that you can't forget what you know. And so that's where the problem becomes, because you know that an individual is involved in some activity or that they hold certain views, and therefore you can't really dismiss that. There isn't a magic button that makes people forget. But there is a magic button that computers will forget. It's called a delete key. And so I think by using AI, we've got the opportunity to provide like a level of abstraction where, yes, we need to do the compliance monitoring, yes, we need to do the surveillance in whichever form, but that only needs to happen for very limited time, and we can use that model to say, well, did anything trip those signals or whatever the defined criteria we've had? If not, forget it, move it into the bin, it's not relevant. And so that, I think, can actually be quite helpful from like a privacy standpoint, because you're not exposing that sensitive information about union memberships, other sensitive data categories that we would consider that might be used for discrimination.
All right. And then
Thank you. Just a really quick one, just actually following up on something you just said, Matt, because it strikes me that there maybe isn't always a delete key in AI, and I'm thinking about machine learning and how biases, of course, can get cumulatively wound up into the system, and it can become very hard to then identify or pinpoint. I suppose the tricky is the slippage between correlation and causation. So although it might note correlations between certain attributes, it might then infer from that certain causations. And so I wonder if that's something you come across in a more practical sense in your day-to-day job, if you're sort of thinking about, what's the word, transparency, I suppose, or kind of pinpointing the risk of certain biases being brought in accidentally, I'm sure, and how does a huge corporation like City start to think about that?
Yeah, so I think model transparency and explainability are key, and certainly the regulators are very aware that that's a need for us to demonstrate, and that's more from a traditional machine learning sense of why would you refuse this customer a loan versus this other customer that you approved the loan for, and so there are pretty rigorous processes that exist for that. Where things are less clear at the moment, and I don't think anyone's got a really good way of doing this, is a transparency into the transformer architectures, so the large language models, where no one can actually really explain why you get a particular sequence of words generated by ChatGPT on one request versus almost identical, but still not identical on the next request. And what I think, there's a number of researchers working really hard on this, is how do you get effectively the recipe card for a model. So you want to understand the ingredients that are going into it, because as an organisation we might be allergic to some of those ingredients, and that's why I really like that analogy. But for the time being, in terms of like the training data that's going into it, yes, you can try and cleanse that as much as possible, try and remove the biases. I think there's a separate question as to whether we want to entirely remove biases. I think it's an interesting debate, because training data is biased because we as humans are biased, and that's where it comes from. Again, thinking particularly about the language models trained on corpus, text corpuses, then that's all come from people. Unless it's been synthetically generated, which is a more recent innovation, but certainly by far the majority of the data that these models are being trained on has been produced by people, and that's where those biases are coming from.
Yes.
So first, I just want to thank you all for your wonderful talks you gave so far. So as for myself, I've worked for multiple companies, and they always gather data, they just know it. But they always differed in how closely they scrutinize data and how they would bring this up in evaluations and talks. So my question is, what about the diminishing returns? Because all the companies I worked for were very successful, but they had such different approaches in terms of badge lights, online activity, Zoom and email. So is there a point where scrutinizing every single screenshot click kind of means that you're spending way too much time and resources on just very marginal gains? There's a certain point where I think you can still monitor people without having to go so granular. So what are your thoughts about the risk and reward of kind of implementing these advanced systems?
I would just say very quickly that I think with time, with the use of AI, it will somehow refine. And I think that they will also say at the time that they are using on, for example, those, as you say, not so successful tasks in a way, why is monitoring taking so many aspects when it's not needed? But I think that will just come with time. It will be refined, and it will be on some other level in a way. But I think that Matt maybe has more insight in it.
I think that there's obviously that balance to be struck. So I think about the interactions that I have with people that I work with and people that report to me. Trust is an essential part of that relationship, and I think that overly detailed monitoring that you sort of described, I think is corrosive to that relationship, and so it's not something I would particularly want or use in that scenario.
If I may respond as well, I just being the devil's advocate kind of thing, maybe beginning the discussion later on. I think that these notions of monitoring in workplace and that has come up here, and it's interesting that it's so engaging for people and interesting. They are based on a kind of a deep fear that is associated with the imaginary of 1984, of kind of a tyrannical kind of organization that comes into the minutiae of our lives and so on. And often it is presented like that. For example, with the nudging that people in companies have, that they can be monitored, and maybe you haven't touched your keyboard for a while, and boom, you get an alert that you should get on with your job. But in fact, what's happening now is more like Brave New World. It's more like Aldous Huxley's kind of more subtle forms of surveillance, more subtle forms of discourses that are partly also kind of legitimized and normalized, partly, I'm not saying anything against risk science, because I think it's important, but partly with this idea that, yeah, okay, but it will be refined, and we're going to get to the right balance. Because partly these things they say, okay, but it's for the benefit of all, and it's working well, and it will just, it's a question of perfecting it, you know, and calibrating it a little bit better. But then in the process, what happens is, and that was one of my questions to both of you, but I'll just say it because we need to go to another question, you don't have to answer. I was thinking about Terry Gilliam's movie, sorry, I mean to movie. Brazil, exactly. Amazing movie, also I definitely recommend watching. And it's a dystopian movie from 1985, and one of the funny things there, because it's quite sarcastic, is that sometimes you have posters that people in offices have on their walls, and one of them says, "Don't suspect don't suspect your friend, report him." And I was thinking, when are we going, and I'm sure that we're going to get to it, when are we going to get to a situation of a smart house, for example, in architecture, or a very sophisticated monitoring system in a workplace that is actually reporting everything that we do to a certain third party, you know, so it could be your management, but in case of houses, I mean, I understand that even today, distributed technologies of smart beds, smart fridges, Alexa, you know, things that are kind of disconnected at the moment, could become a very powerful surveillance machine that, you know, who is it going to benefit? Maybe the company that built it, that can sell it to, I don't know, I don't even want to go further. So I just raised it. I wanted to make it as a comment because both of these questions were kind of relevant for that. And we get another question, and then we'll okay, and so you, and then you, quickly, and then we're going to have to take a 10 minutes break, and we come back for the second session. There will be, I remind you, time for questions and debate later on as well. So if you can just take both questions one after the other, and then you can respond directly.
Thank you for the...
It's not working, I think.
Okay. That's hello. Yeah, thank you for the demonstration from Matt. I'm just with the tools that you presented, the Open Interpreter, because when I was working, I had tried to implement a similar kind of tools itself, but a lot similar, not using the GPT one, and it actually can get around some of limitation that is being imposed with certain website when they are blocking AI or code when trying to collect the data. So, do you think how far it will go if we're using this more advanced AI to create that kind of tool, and how will it impact a company? Because nowadays I think most of companies using a lot of internet access data for their marketing purposes. So yeah, that's what I'm going to know. Thank you.
My name is Paige. I'm doing my PhD here in AI in defense. So I guess my questions relate to attitude towards risk, because it seems like, Matt, you were talking about, you're not going to take any risky decision in terms of using these technologies that you don't understand. Like, for example, the LLMs, you said that we still don't understand, can explain how the next word comes in a sentence. So is City using LLM at all? Or if someone else is in your position, would that individual change their mind and they think, oh, doesn't matter, the opportunity is higher than the risk? Yesterday I was at a conference where people talk about LLMs. The stats was that there are about 80 LLM in the world, models in the world, half coming from the US, about 6-7 coming from the UK, and about 25% come from China. Now, and then a lot of the people in the private sector complaining that the EU AI Act, for example, just prevents innovations in the EU. There's no LLM model developed at all in the EU, for example. What do you think about that in terms of regulation and attitude towards adopting these technologies that we don't understand?
Okay, so quite a lot to take in there. So first question on web browsing and online activity. I think we'll very quickly move to a situation where you will have an agent do your web browsing for you. So this process where you go and Google something, you try and research information, you click to the website, that's all going to go away. And you could see that from, was it last week, OpenAI demoed GPT-4o and the multimodal capabilities of that. They were having a very natural conversation with it on the table. They were showing it things. There's an app that they've released for Mac OS at the moment. And so I think very quickly you'll be able to just say, I want a bread machine, can you go and find me one that has these features and costs less than £100? And the battle then will be between OpenAI or whoever's providing that model and then the retailers who are really interested in getting that model's attention. And so the search engine optimization that we've had for 15 years, Google's 25 years old, isn't it, something like that? Mm-hmm. That whole industry, I think, will revert to AI attention optimization in order to pull in more traffic to that. So I think it's going to change quite significantly. Yeah. Is City using LLMs? Yeah, so we're doing lots of experiments. The distinction I want to make though is between decisions that get made. So there are some models within City that we use for fraud and other things. So if we see card transactions from multiple locations, there is an ML model that's looking for that, and that will make that decision. It will say this looks 90% like it's fraud, and then we have thresholds that will then say, okay, we'll stop that. You don't need to involve the person in that because it's important that that fraud gets stopped as soon as possible once we're confident enough that it's occurring, so that the impact to the customer is reduced. For LLMs though, making decisions with those, that's the key, is that we're not there with the decision making. So we use it for output generation or for synthesis of text or summarization of text. But ultimately it's going back to a person to then use that output. So it might be a broker or a trader who's used research about a company and the model has read thousands of pages of documents very quickly, but is able to provide a summary for the trader. It's still the trader's decision then to place that deal or what they're going to do there. Sorry, I didn't quite get you had one more point, didn't you? But,
and the response to did you get your response to that? Sadia? No.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about your question. You mentioned that what risk means to different people, and we have that issue which we say come across different sectors. That risk actually does mean different things to different people, and actually in risk communication that is even amplified, because when it reaches that, when we somehow it really affects with our perceptions and how we actually perceive the risk communication coming from different sides. So yes, it could happen that, for example, if different people talk about different issues, especially related with new technologies such as AI, that they would actually refer to them on different, so to say, levels of riskiness in a way.
All right then, as they say, we'll take 10 minutes break, yeah, and be here 22 to 4. We'll continue then.
Thanks for those of you who are here. We'll proceed to the second session. We have 3 speakers, and that will be as well followed by questions, answers, and a debate, which I hope that we can take for maybe longer. We'll see how it goes. The first speaker is Claire, who is my colleague at the Samsonite, Samcom project. Yep. And Claire will not have a slide, so pay attention. Yes.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Claire Dungy, and I'm a postdoc here at King's College. And I'm working under this project called SAMCOM, which is funded by the European Research Council. The title of my talk, sorry, I haven't done a PowerPoint, so I hope you're going to pay attention. But the title of my talk is, When the Product is Free, You Are the Product. So surveillance, family life, and critical perspectives on AI in Germany. So I've done 9 months of ethnographic fieldwork in southern Germany, mostly in Munich. I participated in everyday life. I went to visit people in community centres. I mostly interacted with family members. I wanted to know what it was like when parents monitor their kids at a distance. So for instance, they're using an app. Now they're checking where is my child right now. So okay, they've arrived at school, they're safe. Or they're on their way home. And I wanted to understand issues around this, and also kind of counter surveillance. So not everyone would agree with this and think this is a good thing. So it's really, my focus was not specifically on AI, but it was quite interesting how AI occurred in multiple conversations with people. As soon as you mention anything about digital technologies, they would start talking about AI. So I'm going to mention some of these examples today. I would say, as a disclaimer, I'm no expert on AI, so I'm here to learn as well. So this study has mainly focused on parents' perspectives on, specifically this talk today, on AI, but I did try to explore children's own views on what it meant to be monitored. It's much more difficult to explore the children's views, even though I've done research with children for more than a decade in different countries. But it was because the parents really wanted to influence the children's views, and they wanted to sit next to them and sort of say, well, actually, I think this is much better. So this is one of the reasons why my talk today is going to be mainly about what the parents think. I did have some shorter-term interactions with kids. Some of them I met multiple times. We played, we cooked together, we did multiple things that didn't necessarily have anything to do with digital surveillance, but as a way of building up trust. So Germany is quite an interesting place to study digital surveillance, because in 2017 there was a doll called My Friend Kyla. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's a doll that could record children's voices undercover, which meant that potentially corporations could listen in and record voices, and maybe hackers could get access to this data and misuse it for some purpose. Maybe even communicate directly with children. So the Bundesnetzagentur in Germany, which is the federal network agency, they banned this smart doll in 2017, saying this is an illegal espionage software. We need to ban it. And they instructed parents to destroy the doll entirely. I don't know if this happened. The interesting thing was that not that many parents actually had heard of it, or even wanted to talk about it particularly, but they did want to talk about data security and what was happening with their data. But not very many of them wanted to talk about the doll. It wasn't a significant part of their lives. But it was also quite a few years ago. So this study was between 2022 and 2023. So I'm going to mention some of the examples that occurred in my fieldwork. So this is going to be quite ethnographic, based on specific case studies, quite brief descriptions of each case, really. So I met a family towards the end of my fieldwork in July 2023. I was recommended to talk to this family because they use Alexa. So I met them and I was invited into their home, and then I realized they've got all these devices. I've never seen them before, this massive satellite kind of object. But also every single bedroom they had different Alexa devices. They were mostly using Apple products though, so I think they used a combination of Siri and Alexa. But they also used digital tracking technologies to monitor their kids. The mother used it mostly because she thought it was quite convenient when picking up her kids, knowing exactly when they were coming from the U-Bahn, which is like this train. So she knew exactly when to pick them up, where they were. Okay, I can check it on a map. But she didn't use it very often. It was mainly only a couple of times a month. The dad, he didn't want to use it at all, but he had it installed. He said, well, knock, knock, knock. In case something happens, I've got it. I've got it installed. So the parents had kind of slightly different perspectives on surveillance. The dad was a little bit more cautious. He's an IT specialist, likes digital technology, but he's also quite cautious of where's the data going. But he says, you know, I have a balanced approach. approach because I don't like to be completely paranoid. Some people in Germany, you know, when you take a picture in public, they'll tell you immediately to delete the photo because they might be on the photo and who knows what the data will be used for. But he doesn't want to go to that extreme. He wants his kids to learn about digital surveillance dangers. He wants them to use technologies from an early age to actually learn about what should they expect in the future. The daughter in the family, I mostly talked to the mum and the two children. So there was a daughter who's 13 years old and a son who's 15. The daughter was very engaged in this discussion and she said, actually, you know, they can collect anything they want. I don't really care. She said it was quite useful to receive algorithmic recommendations because it's useful. You know, you get the kind of products that you want. And the mother said, no, you have to be very careful with this. We'll talk about this another time. Because she said, you know, whenever you're searching for anything online, there's going to be a data profile about you and you need to be aware of this. So she was trying to communicate this to her children. The dad, when I spoke to him later, when he was eating his breakfast on a separate day, he said, you know, people have a real paranoia about being tracked, but they want everything to be free. And I don't know if this is because he uses an expression about sausages, you do that a lot in Germany, but he said, this is how the sausage is made. You like the taste, so you have to realize this is what happens for you to get the product. He had this anxiety about the future, though. Although he had this kind of balanced approach, he had an anxiety that in the future, insurance companies might be collecting data about him. Oh, they're checking his Strava app and seeing, you haven't done much exercise last week. And then he has this anxiety that the insurance companies will alter their different payments or whatever he had to pay. So he didn't want that kind of dystopian future. Those were his own words. I'm going to move on to the next case now. I spoke to a mother who originally came from another country, and her husband and her, they had won Siri in a competition. It was like a lottery. But she hadn't really planned it, but then they sort of kept it, wondered whether they should use it. And she said, we have Alexa at home. Sometimes I find it questionable. Sometimes you come in the kitchen and the camera is located exactly in the location where you come in. And I don't know how much of it is recorded. Sometimes we have asked Alexa to take a photograph. And it takes a photograph, but I ask myself where it ends up. But then she said, well, actually, these kind of digital technologies, they have a caring function. She had used a baby monitor with her youngest child who had a health problem, so it was useful. But Alexa had also helped her son learn how to speak. So that was the reason why, even though she had doubts about it, she kept holding on to it. Now in Germany, there are quite a number of people who were quite critical of tracking. So I met a father towards the end of my fieldwork who tracks his 8-year-old son using a kind of smartwatch. So many children who are a little bit younger, they have a smartwatch rather than a phone. But he says whenever he's engaging online, he tries to avoid having a digital footprint. He pays with cash rather than using cards. He doesn't use Facebook, he uses DuckDuckGo rather than Google. He says no to cookies as much as possible. And he said to me, when the product is free, you are the product. He described how the Stasi regime in Germany was quite terrible in the past, and people were always monitoring each other. But he's saying what they're doing now is actually good surveillance, because they're looking after each other as a kind of form of care. But he's also he describes this paranoia that some people in Germany might have in relation to data security. And he says, well, you know, I know that this smartwatch is a catastrophe in terms of in terms of privacy and data security, but I use it because it's useful. I know when my son is on his way, he can press the alarm button and say that I'm at the bus stop. And he also said it's kind of limited what kind of information they can generate using this, what algorithms can generate, because it's only, my son is walking to school, then he's coming back home. My son is walking to school, then he's coming back home, or he's going to his friend. It's compartmentalized, and this is how he argued that it was okay. And he also did it because his wife felt more comfortable about it. Another family, they were more in the direction of avoiding AI. They had 3 kids, the husband and wife. The dad doesn't want to use WhatsApp at all. He thinks it's tracking him in many ways. The wife does use it because it's helpful for various groups, but with the kindergarten. The dad avoids using anything that could potentially track him and leave a digital footprint. He doesn't want to use Google. He doesn't want to use a free email service, so he uses a German version of it. And he wouldn't want to use any Play Store kind of software because you never know where the data ends up. So he wants to avoid profiling at all costs. At the same time, being an IT specialist, again, he had installed an internal sort of system that allowed him to monitor his child's media use so that he didn't use it too much because he felt that he wasn't able to control this himself. So this idea, you can have an internal system where the data stays within the home and then external system where you never know where it ends up. And he says, I hate it when these companies steal our data. He said, this is even though there is a Data Protection Act. You never know when, sometimes they're using this outside the EU. So his future aspiration is to live in a world in which you have to pay for digital services because he's worried about algorithmic monitoring, how it will develop. He doesn't think that this is going to happen, that you have to pay for everything though. So I met a mother at the beginning of my fieldwork who talked about AI quite generally when we talked about digital monitoring. She has 4 kids, and I met her in a community centre, so I didn't actually meet her kids. But she said she was really against this idea of, the doll, that was really scary, that it couldn't record children's voices, and she wouldn't like that. Why would anyone want to have access to that kind of data? And she doesn't want to use Alexa, just like the dad before, who didn't want to use any free email service. She didn't like the idea because data could be misused. And we spoke more generally sort of about facial recognition software because in the UK there was a case that children could pay for their school lunches using facial recognition. And she didn't like this idea. But then she suddenly started talking about slightly other digital developments that could emerge, and she said, so I could never think of putting a chip in my arm right now, but I can't put my hand in the fire, so she can't be sure that I might not do it in 10 years' time because it offers me more advantages. So she had this kind of, well, you never know what happens in the future. So just to summarize here at the end, I think many of the German parents were quite skeptical of AI technologies, whether they use them or not. So those who use them, they were kind of like, well, we have to be very careful with data security. We keep it inside our internal network. And then there were others who was much more sort of in the counter sort of boat, you could say, when they were saying, well, we don't think this is a good idea because we never know where the data is going. You can't trust free services. But at the same time, technologies are useful in terms of offering care. And sometimes they might be willing to compromise some of their principles. So the dad, for instance, who said, well, it's compartmentalized, my wife likes me to use it because then she feels safer, but I know it's a catastrophe in terms of data protection. And there's this distinction between being a bit paranoid about data and being a bit more, I'm kind of relaxed about it, my children need to learn about future risks that they might encounter, so it's better that they encounter it rather than completely avoiding it. So this idea that you have to avoid data profiling. It's interesting in Germany and in the EU that there are new AI acts that are currently being developed, and it would be interesting to see how this would change perspectives, potentially also in Germany. But there's been quite harsh criticism of AI technology. Technologies, particularly the dolls that can record children's voices undercover. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Just to add one sentence to this, I guess what you also bring into the picture is the notion of context, because AI, we are talking about AI as if it's the same thing everywhere, used by everybody, but it's not. It's got a history. It's got local cultural patterns and ideas. In the case of Germany, obviously, it's the inheritance of first the tyranny of the Nazis, and then later on, at least in East Germany, the Stasi and the surveillance system of the state, which directly influences when did the wall break down? 1989. So nearly 35 years later, people still are captured by this question. And I think that the debate on context is something that is needed for defense, for security, for any type of risk assessment that is related to AI, because the risks and the uses are also different based on social aspects. So thank you very much. Now we are going to Rob. Your slides are
on the browser.
Here we go.
Yeah. All right, cool. Hello. All right, context. Matan, you did a very good word to throw up, because I'm going to talk about context a lot. I'm going to talk about the technology that allows us to change the context through which we see the world, because I am a writer and an experienced designer, whatever that is. I started my career in the games industry as a lead game writer at PlayStation. I wrote the very first PlayStation VR demo, and then I worked on a couple of reasonably groundbreaking augmented reality titles there. I now run an AR studio called Playlines. I write award-winning VR and AR games, and I design immersive theatre and augmented stuff for museums. I'm a visiting fellow at KCL, studying location-based media, and in fact, me and my team a couple of years ago made a surveillance CCTV assault course out on the Strand, just out there, prototype, but it was a cool project. I've just finished writing a book on storytelling for augmented reality. Now, I'm not an AI or a surveillance specialist, I'm a content person. And I'm here to give the perspective of someone who thinks a lot about how the world changes when we look at it through technology, and how that seemingly see-through technology might alter or augment or recontextualize the way we see the world. And increasingly, I think a lot about how the technology that underpins immersive experiences like VR and augmented reality, how that technology might be watching us. Now, first off, how many people have used a VR headset? Hands up. How many people have used what they describe as augmented reality? Is everybody reasonably happy with the difference between those two, or shall I spend a minute describing the difference? Everybody's reasonably happy? Come and grab me afterwards if you'd like to chat more about it. If you're confused about the distinction between augmented reality, mixed reality, and spatial computing, it's because it's confusing, don't worry about it. So, yeah. Augmented reality. I believe that augmented reality technology, or mixed reality, or spatial computing, or whatever the buzzword du jour is, I believe this stuff is another earth-shaking technological volcano currently rumbling beneath our feet, along with AI. The augmented reality advertising market alone is projected to be worth $7.8 billion by 2028. Small potatoes compared to the estimated industrial and commercial value of AI, but augmented reality technology has the potential to alter and adjust and reimagine the way we see the world, and in turn, how we think about the world and how we behave in it. And that's a big deal, especially when combined with AI and when superpowered by surveillance, or particularly when these technologies can incentivize users to perform self-surveillance. Now, come on, always the way, isn't it? AI is the missing link, which allows us to imagine pretty soon being able to put on a pair of glasses which maps and meshes and then visually reskins the street or the neighborhood around you into a Victorian gas lamp fantasy or a Nintendo-themed world, or whatever version of reality the user might want to live in. So, there we go. Before Pokemon Go, there were numerous attempts at creating location-based digital experiences. I've been making location-based AR since long before Pokemon Go. Games like the Tokyo-based Mogi back in 2003 were already recontextualizing public space as a digital scavenger hunt. But in games like that, all the content had to be geolocated by hand, like a sort of digital geocaching. The teams of people had to place digital rewards physically onto the map, not physically, but manually onto the map. And this would development of mapping algorithms, access to vast contextual data sets that let computers understand the geography around the user, which allowed Niantic to create geolocated content at a global scale. Small-scale, manually geolocated content suddenly jumped into global-scale geolocation with context-aware content powered by machine learning. That enabled experiences like Pokemon Go, which is effectively an additional dimension of play augmented onto everyday life, with millions of users living their lives partially within that extra dimension. And I think that same jump in scale, powered by machine learning, is suddenly about to happen soon. It's about to happen inside a headset, allowing users to look at the world and view very different versions of reality, to partially live within very divergent versions of reality, customized perhaps by taste, customized perhaps even by ideology. Now, consistently augmenting graphics onto reality at scale will require stable diffusion-driven spatial mapping, combined with geospatial datasets powered by an AI, or AIs, making inferences about the shape of the world. That's what allows headsets and glasses to superimpose contextual augmentations onto physical space. That might be a digital voucher that pops out of the Burger King as you walk past it. Or it might mean users being able to live partially within living, adaptive, AI-powered game layers. And those game layers might reimagine public space as a more adventurous place, or they might reimagine public space as contested territory. Now, what does all this have to do with surveillance? Ultimately, augmented reality technology promises to allow us to customize and reskin and reimagine the world, or more likely, to have that customization and reskinning and reimagination done for us, algorithmically, by the platform holders, who just happen to be some of the world's largest and most powerful companies. And this technology doesn't just change how we see things. In order for it to work, it must also be watching us. As the CEO of Niantic, John Hanke, who helped create Google's mapping division, as he said, they're gambling that the next wave of successful consumer apps will be those which help users contextually understand the world and can superimpose information and graphics onto reality. But the visual part of AR, the visual trick of superimposing graphics onto reality, that's not really the linchpin of doing that. The linchpin is having enough data about where the user is in the world and what it is that they're looking at. And this is where surveillance comes in, because the thing is, surveillance is inherent to these technologies. If you ever wondered why Niantic, a company which originally spun out of Google's mapping division, why they went to the trouble of creating their geolocation games like Ingress and Pokemon Go, bear in mind that although Pokemon Go made $1 billion in its first month, that was probably just a bonus, a byproduct. The real purpose of the games, most likely, was to incentivize users to contribute contextual data about their local places to a vast user-generated spatial contextual data set. Now Niantic are back in the Google portfolio. At least some of that data set is now being used to power other mapping applications in the Google ecosystem. It's not just Alphabet either. Apple, Baidu, Meta, Microsoft, Samsung, Sony, Tencent have all sunk billions into technology and patents that gamble on the idea that millions of consumers will soon be living within partly digitized versions of the real world. And it's data about the world, the data that you can scrape off those users, combined with AI-powered systems to use that data to make inferences about the world. That's what will allow companies to be able to offer curated, customized, digitized realities at scale. Now, the more laissez-faire of you in the crowd may be thinking, okay, that geocontextual data scraped from users is fully permissioned. Users have to agree to the T's and C's, which includes the fact that all of the data that they generate for a game like Pokemon Go ultimately doesn't belong to them. And for the record, when it comes to surveillance, I'm firmly on team nuance. Thanks, Matt. That's a great term, I'm going to borrow that. Augmented reality applications which influence how users move through spaces sometimes are also designed to incentivize users to volunteer data about their spaces, to make those spaces more useful or usable. Okay. So is it fair to call augmented reality a surveillance technology? Well, never mind the fact that the technology is looking at the world or maybe incentivizing users to record the world and submit it to a server. That technology is also looking at those users very closely, and it may also be looking at anyone else nearby. When we start to think of reality augmentation as something, not just something that happens on a phone, but something that's happening inside a headset that comes with an array of incredibly powerful biometric sensors, that technology is also very definitely looking at us. And it has to, in order to operate. VR, AR, spatial technologies are constantly scanning their user and the surrounding world, acquiring bodily data. And bodily data is extremely valuable in identifying us, quantifying even quite intimate things about us. The platform holding companies, they want to keep that data. One 2023 study showed that individual users of the VR game Beat Saber could be identified from body language alone with more than 94% accuracy, given 100 seconds of recording. Half of users could be identified from just 2 seconds of footage of their motion data. And this is bodily data. It's much more granular and valuable to advertisers or to surveillors than data from a 2D browser about eyeballs. As a 2022 report to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said, that data, quote, it's not just the user's real identity, which is mostly already known by the platforms, it's a new quality of information that's comprised of the user's identity combined with their reactions to particular stimuli, including what someone uniquely may think and like and want. Literally this morning, a startup called Bootloader came out of stealth with a plan to offer augmented reality pets for Apple's Vision Pro, which will use AI to read and respond to the user's emotions. And it's not just about reading users. According to that NYU report, the Rosenblatt report I quoted earlier, the platform holders of immersive technologies could soon pair real-time surveillance with real-time influence. Companies could, quote, track billions of people and impart influence on select individuals by altering the world around them in targeted and adaptive ways. Early this year, MIT researchers found that they could inject so-called inception attacks into MetaQuest headsets, diverting VR players into alternative virtual realities without the user's knowledge. Back in 2018, researchers were already able to find vulnerabilities in VR systems and control the movements of immersed users, lead them to predetermined locations without the user's knowledge, a type of attack that's called a human joystick attack. It's disconcerting. Now I want to stick this on in the background. AI and stable diffusion-powered inferences about the shape and movement of our bodies can be incredibly powerful. These are all generated, now this is generated in post, but it's all generated from flat 2D footage of this guy walking through his house, and then with a little bit of AI, machine learning powered post-processing, it is being dynamically reskinned. The jump between this happening in post-production and being able to happen in real time, that's a couple of years maybe. So AI being able to make inferences about the shape of our bodies allows us to really dynamically reimagine the world. And when that starts happening in a pair of lightweight glasses, happening in real time, are we really even living in the same version of reality anymore? Even if you don't choose to wear a headset yourself, there may be no way to control, no way to even know how others on the street might be using that technology to reskin you. John Hankey again, who thinks that people should have the right, if they choose, to view a Nintendoized version of the world. Sees it as an issue of fundamental bodily rights. Why should someone have the right to assert some control over how I choose to see the world? We don't think that any external person has any rights over our personal perceptual model of the universe, right? Soon a mobile or headset will be able to show users a reskinned version of reality, the street, the passers-by, even their own body in real time, so players can choose to live within that Victorian gas lamp version of their neighbourhood, or a Nintendo-themed scavenger hunt in a city centre. If you stand at a bus stop wearing AR glasses, and you look at an augmented advert on the side of that bus stop, that advert doesn't have a zero-sum physical presence that we can see and touch and we can all agree is there. That advert could be an image which exists only for you, especially if it's been generated by an AI to be customized to you. What happens if that's a political advert, or political speech? What happens if it's graffiti, or reality markup, specific to a closed, encrypted community? You might effectively be seeing a completely different version of local reality compared to the other people standing at that same bus stop. At that point, you and the people at that bus stop are all effectively living in different realities, much more literally than ever before. Some players might choose to live inside a game lair which visualizes the world as if it's a space of, color-coded contested territory, clean, black and white morality. Or which visualizes people from other game factions as if they're demons or orcs. None of this is possible at scale without AI, and without data which amounts to either surveillance or self-surveillance. Some users might choose to view a world overlaid with hidden or encrypted layers of ideological messages, dark layers. They could be exploitative, or embed illegal content into real places, or manifest crypto-political perspectives onto reality. They could be a dark web-like dimension to the real world. We already know that algorithmically driven content feeds, like the ones that Facebook uses, or Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it, they can rapidly create ideological filter bubbles, echo chambers. Increasingly, we all kind of live within slightly different versions of reality anyway, right? Over the last few years, we've seen the radicalizing effect of echo chambers in real time on the first drafts of history. They're very real effects on culture and politics, people's ability to live within increasingly fantastical versions of reality. And that all happened in 2D. Echo chambers composed entirely of information fed through two-dimensional browsers and screens. Now, with technology increasingly able to augment and personalize various versions of reality in 3D, all-encompassing, and fed by AI, able to adapt to the surroundings around the user, to reimagine or reskin it in whatever way that user chooses, or whatever way their platform holder curates for them. It's now possible to imagine people living in custom realities, which increasingly they might not want to leave. In effect, all current AR and spatial technologies are entangled with the service, content, data, business models of some of the world's largest companies. The same technology that makes augmented reality storytellers like me, that lets us write new kinds of stories into the world, to inscribe on the digital dimension of reality, that technology also might allow read-write access to the end user. Now, most users get that their data is being commoditized, right? If the product is free, then you're the product. That's the price we pay for free technology. But even if you're happy to be part of the content data ecosystem, being tracked in this way can affect your behavior. According to that UN Human Rights Report, there's a risk of self-censorship in the most fundamental way if users find themselves trying to limit what they feel or think or express for fear that information will be monetized or researched. If you're on TikTok and you've ever swiped past a video in order to train your algorithm, so no, I don't want this, don't show me any more of this, you've self-censored in that way. It's built into the platform. But imagine recreating that dynamic in the real world with your real gaze. Under a capitalist system, this might mean choosing to avert your gaze from real products on the shelves so that your algorithm doesn't decide you want to buy them. Under a totalitarian system, you might need to self-censor your gaze by not looking at banned or marginalized elements of the real world because your wearable system might be tracking your gaze, or it might just augment those elements out of your reality altogether. This isn't science fiction anymore, and as Matan said earlier, this is more Brave New World than 1984. So, just as AI is beginning to change what we can imagine in terms of human technical capability, it's also going to be powering technology which allows us humans, to a greater extent than ever before, to live within personalized realities. Maybe bespoke, custom versions of the world, and they'll be entangled with AIs which are required to run those reimaginings of the world. People with the financial access to this technology might be opting to live in increasingly digitized and customized divergent realities, maybe designed to confirm their biases or drive engagement the same way online filter bubbles are. While of course the majority of people in the world, for them those new user-friendly realities are completely financially out of reach. Those new realities will not just be new ways of seeing, they'll also be looking at the user. Mixed reality headsets and glasses might not only give users a kind of mutant power supervision, they might also introduce an unprecedented level of supervision into those users' lives, and we all behave differently when we're being supervised. And those world versions within which some people might choose to live, they might not just be useful interfaces for reality or playful reimaginings of a more adventurous version of your neighborhood. They might actually be partially AI hallucinations. That's where I want to leave it. There's a whole load more about this in my book, which is out from Routledge in October. Please do send me an email. As you can tell, I never get tired of talking about this stuff. And thank you very much for your time, and thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot. Now we accept with joy Jennifer from UCL that will be talking about alternative in anthropological language. Let's look, it's right here.
Yeah. So.
Wait. Yes, I'm doing it. It's very slow.
Oh, great, wonderful.
Just go one by one.
Thank you very much. I'm Jenny. I'm an anthropologist based at UCL. But today I'm actually going to talk a little bit more philosophically. I promise you this is the last talk, seatbelts on, you're nearly there, and then there's wine, I'm told. So, the rise of generative AI in mental health care apps has been heralded by clinicians and the government alike as something of a silver bullet to tackle a growing crisis in healthcare provision in the UK and in many other countries as well. These technologies, which typically involve a sort of a talking therapy through an app for the user, have been met with enthusiasm all over the world for their capacity to increase access to healthcare, to circumvent social stigma, to reduce power imbalances between the care provider and patient, and, I think importantly, to introduce a more personalised provision of healthcare. I haven't published this yet, so please don't steal it, but I've started referring to this as the cyber boom, this huge explosion of mental health care apps using AI. Last year, when I last gave this talk, it was worth just over 5 billion. Now, as of yesterday, apparently it's worth 7.18 billion as a global market. So it's this personalised aspect of digital mental health care provision that I want to talk about briefly today, by looking at how generative AI challenges our analytical frameworks for thinking about the self. But firstly, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind traced tour of a cultural history of mental health care, at least in sort of the global north, Western Europe and North America, to set the context for how and why notions of surveillance and these ideas of self and other are crucial for us when it comes to understanding how we might have arrived at a point where AI can be our therapist. So from the 16th century onwards, The notion of an individual has been associated within Western philosophy as sitting in opposition to the other. The self, as a thinking mind, is located in a body, which is physically distinct from another person. And this is how we know ourselves to be indivisibly and boundedly, uniquely distinct as living and importantly thinking beings. So in Cartesian terms, we know ourselves through our separation from others. Stemming from these post-Enlightenment, highly rationalistic frameworks, the history of treatment of mental illness has long centered around this idea of distance. So this image comes from what at the time would have been called a lunatic asylum. You can go and visit this place. Some of you may know the word bedlam in English. It usually means chaos. It actually comes from Bedlam Hospital, which is now part of the Royal Maudsley, which was the Hospital of Bethlehem. It was founded by crusaders coming back from the Middle East, actually. But it became associated with the bedlam, the chaos of the, quote, lunatics inside, who you could quite literally go and visit as a paying public. Charles Dickens took his family there for a lovely day out. You could pay a penny, and you would see the patients, usually manacled to their beds. And actually, it is now still a psychiatric hospital. I don't think they do this anymore. Many early asylums were inspired by Jeremy Bentham's panopticon prison design. As a small aside, if anyone wants to come and visit me at UCL, Jeremy Bentham, who famously came up with the idea of the panopticon, is rather ironically, his body is embalmed and in a glass box, surveilling students as they go into the library. I always think that's very ironic. Then anyway, the panopticon, which was the foundation of many Victorian prison designs and early asylums, was designed to physically separate the unwell from the well. The idea was that this would encourage patients to view themselves from an externalized perspective, and that this would help to cure them. So again, there was an important aspect here of separation, physically constructed into space, to enable surveillance, both self-surveillance and from a surveilling other, in this case, these rather charming nurses. And most people today would trace modern-day psychotherapy back to Sigmund Freud, who concluded that mental illness was the result of keeping thoughts or memories in the unconscious. He developed methods which would involve listening and providing interpretations that would bring memories to the light of day, once again focusing upon the externalization of an internal reality. The psychotherapist provides a sort of sounding board, helping the client to externalize their thoughts, providing an analytical mirror to detect patterns. You can probably see where I'm going with this. So this remains at the heart of much psychotherapy today and is at the core of what these apps seek to do. In this way, mental health apps and diagnostic apps leverage a very long history, a cultural history of self-surveillance and infrastructures of subject formation. They call upon users to track their own mood, and they also detect for behavioural patterns in things like text, but also using your GPS, you haven't got out of bed yet today, you've not gone out, or your pulse has changed. All of this data, which as we've already heard is readily available through your phone, they are using to detect changes in your way of being in the world. The capacity for these apps to intelligently provide personalised care is generally seen as a great advancement afforded by AI in comparison to the more traditional talking therapy treatments. And most of these apps implement digital phenotyping techniques to categorize users to provide this more personalized or tailored response. It's no longer a one-size-fits-all, more one-size-fits-a-segment. So as I've said, the apps will utilize all of these different sources of data, including passive data that it's getting through the phone, voice pattern analysis, sentiment analysis, and so on, to enable personalization through these talking therapy chatbots. The intelligent chatbots utilize large language models to simulate a patient-therapist encounter, delivering highly personalized and adaptive care. But, and this is where I come to my main argument, when we look more closely at how large language models that underpin these platforms work, we quickly see that our analytical frameworks of self and other, much of our philosophy of self, in fact, starts to fall short, because large language models work by constantly placing data points in relation to others individuals, or data deriving from them, in relation to one another. Large language models, I'm sure I don't need to tell most of you, are based on neural networks that process vast data sets to detect patterns and relationships between data, and then they calculate from the context of that what is likely to be the most coherent next response. This can be further shaped by the data you give it so that it appears to be highly personalized to you. So to give some more familiar examples, I'm sure many of you are familiar with things like predictive text. This is a very, very sort of mundane example of something. Or next suggested purchases on Amazon. We already heard earlier as well about how many companies like Spotify and Netflix appear almost to be able to see into your psyche and know what you want before you know you want it. Actually, what these systems are doing is calculating probability. They place you within a matrix of relations. Wonderfully, by the way, this is an AI-generated image. I asked Bing AI to tell me what would human relations look like through code, and it gave me this, which is very helpful. So users in these sort of preference systems who are held to be near one another in this multi-dimensional coordinate system are assumed to be similar, and will be recommended something from that neighborhood around them. So when you type into, say, WhatsApp, it will suggest the next word it thinks you're most likely going to use, and it will be doing that based on huge data sets of human-created content, but also tailored by what you might typically type into your phone. So these algorithmic prediction systems effectively place individuals, in data form, within systems of extenuated relations to aspects of other people. And so ironically, to articulate an individual through a large language model, they must be de-individuated, subduing all singularities into calculability, placing any knowledge produced within these extenuated systems of relations. And so, in a way, generative AI that we're interacting with in apps like Replica, Wobot, and so on, is a new type of technology of self. And this is where I come to sort of the granddaddy of surveillance studies. Of course, Foucault, for whom the process of individualization through, this is the sort of famous panopticon of Joan Bentham, was to be understood as a process of subjectification via objectification. So what that means, the subject is divided from the other. So in this prison design, the subject is surveilled by another, the prison guard in this case. And it is through that surveillance that you start to adapt your own behaviour and become subject to control. You make yourself a subject by being in such systems. In the case of an asylum, the mad are divided from the sane, the sick from the healthy. That is sort of your classic panopticon idea in philosophy. And what I'm saying is that here, individuals are not divided from others. They are created by being merged with others. To create an individual through a large language model, you have to do so by merging that person's data with the data of countless millions, billions of other people. Suspending people within these new complex vectors of correlation. For many, these sorts of apps signal a neoliberal move towards self-surveillance, of course, repositioning the responsibility of care upon the self. You can work on yourself, work on your mood and make yourself better, as in sort of more traditional panopticon model. But I argue these apps actually move us beyond a limitation of this panopticon idea. Self and other become useless categories because each is actually scaffolding the other in this construction of a new type of subject formation. Yes, the apps tell us to take control of our own internal emotional state through self-surveillance and through tracking technologies in the phone itself, but they also are interpolating or merging self and other, subject and object, through the actual technical processes that happen in the code of these apps. And why does this matter? Well, many of these mental health apps very explicitly market themselves as being empathic. In other words, that they are capable of constructing an interpersonally subjective relationship. This is pretty central to Freud's idea of talking therapy, right? The idea that you talk to somebody else They externalize, help you to externalize your thoughts, and in so doing, you're able to analyze yourself. And so I think that empathy in this new realm we're arriving at also becomes an interesting lens for thinking about how personhood shifts in this new AI age. Because as Sophie Day and Celia Lurie, goldsmiths, if anyone wants to look them up, have pointed out, personalization in this landscape is not just personal. It's not actually about one person, it becomes an act of generalization. And so personalization also constrains who we are and how we can be. There's an interesting paradox, I think, that in order to look and feel personal, the whole system relies upon something deeply impersonal. So an inherent assumption within these systems is that it places patients as data points reduced down in comparison to one another, and that they are therefore directly comparable to one another. It reduces our subjectivities down so that well-being becomes not personal, but inherently relational. In this way, these systems, I would suggest, actually harken back to some older thinking, now very out of date in psychology, which was sort of a more, in line with industrialization, there was a sort of a move in the 19th century to quantify the psyche, and this is actually a real thing from America at the beginning of the, reminds me of smartphones a bit, that would track your ankles and you'd be seeing visual prompts, it would make you calm, apparently. Don't think it would make me calm. So, this is also real, I didn't make this up. The promise of digital phenotyping for mental health appears person-centered, but its return to objectivity, to metrics and enumeration, revives wider critiques of power in psychiatry. So, honestly, I didn't make that up. I couldn't believe it when I found it. So, the argument I want to make, just to finish up and to open up something perhaps for the panel as well, is that these technical solutions that I've outlined here in the use of generative AI in mental health apps causes us to reconsider what empathy can actually mean and what interpersonal relationships can even mean. If empathy is a subject engagement, what does that actually mean when we're talking about the self reduced to data and then sort of compartmentalized and spliced and merged with other people's data? So when you're engaging with this talking therapy chatbot thing, are you talking to yourself? Are you in fact in an echo chamber or a hall of mirrors typing to sort of refracted versions of your own psyche mediated by the app? Who are we relating to when we use these technologies? Ourselves? The data of millions of others? In this way, this becomes a new technology for standardizing, normatizing, categorizing people. And I don't have time, so I won't talk about the sort of historic problematic issues that have arisen through similar sort of things in the past. So I'll end just by reaching back to that well-used panopticon image in surveillance studies. Nicholas Rose is the person you want to look up if you want to look at the idea of neoliberal subject formation and how self-surveillance makes us our own agents of our own control, and how this has adapted into healthcare. But as I've outlined above, I don't think this is only about self-surveillance and us taking control. I would actually suggest that through this conflation of self and other that's happening really when you look at the technical way that these things are working, it leads us into technologies that actually go far beyond our idea of the self. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, very good, very good.
I just try to hit it.
Yeah. All right. If panelists, all of you will come in. We have 25 minutes. I need to involve the last 5 minutes for your evaluation. So we can start a debate and question and answers at the same time. Are there any readily available questions, or I would do some, I see that good. So we go directly to this, please there.
Yeah, thank you. It's quite interesting for me. I travelled between Hong Kong, China, and of course I'm in Europe. It's very interesting to see the difference in the social acceptance of surveillance. In mainland China, you just accept you're surveilled everywhere. In Hong Kong, it's slightly more objection to that, but here, although the police have just got permission to use general surveillance in London. But I wanted to come really to Rob's thing. I've just done a case. It was a team of programmers who the company was looking at augmented reality to show new clothes. Within a week of perfecting that, 4 of the programmers had worked out a way of taking the clothes off. And then it linked into social media, so that you could actually identify the person, identify anything like tattoos they have from bikini photographs or anything like that, and you've got a 99% accurate video system of that. And of course, you know, we're going to see that taken into all sorts of other things. And I wondered what the panel's view was on security like that, because the regulations are never going to be there, or at least they're there now because they've been put in, but they're never going to be enforceable in time to prevent the chaos that this comes from.
Yeah, I think it's very apt. Though I didn't get into it today, but there's a chunk about this in my research in the book, because we know that machine learning powered deepfakes are being used to create deepfake porn of people, including minors, often based on 1-2 photos of them. When I showed that image of 2D footage of someone moving through their house, it's just as easy to imagine that body being reskinned as a machine learning or an AI imagined nude of that person. It's relatively easy to imagine that being possible in real time as someone walks down the street wearing a pair of glasses and choosing to view certain people as they walk past as a machine-inferred nude of that person.
When you have Google Glass, which was discontinued.
Well, exactly, and that sense of the people, walking around having that always on surveillance was a big part of why those people were termed glass holes over a decade ago. Has our tolerance for being surveilled risen? Probably, but also the capabilities of what people might privately be doing in the privacy of their own perceptual model as they walk down the street, the capabilities of those have become vast. Now, we can't police what goes on inside your imagination. If you walk down the street and you later find out that someone who walked past you was choosing to view your body reskinned as a nude, is that materially different to them imagining you nude as you sit opposite them on the tube? Does it matter if they delete the imagery afterwards or never share it with anybody? Does that make a difference? Have your rights been violated if someone has generated this real-time 3D imagery of you, if then it's gone? In what way is that different to something happening in the privacy of your own head compared to the privacy of an algorithmically driven system? Who knows? We are going to have some ugly precedent-setting cases, and I think there are going to be real harms, and it's going to be vulnerable and young people who get harmed by those technologies, and it's possible that I'm part of the problem.
If I could just also add one tiny little ethnographic example, I think is an interesting sort of secondary example. I've done a lot of research with people that use AI to recreate the dead. In theory, as a way of mourning and helping to move on. But I've spoken to a lot of relatives who obviously have a lot of issues with that, and some of them were very surprised to find that that's not illegal. You could recreate, and there was a very famous case of somebody actually giving the eulogy at his own funeral, for example, in 3D, visually there. And so I think there are some questions about sort of whether there should be legal protections of identity, and I think it does bring us to question what actually is a person's identity. Is that an asset now that needs to be protected in certain ways?
Yes?
Yeah. Can I just follow up on that? Because I'm interested in what the new normal is going to be, and I think what we are in is a transitional phase between some sort of old view of the world and new one. And the reskilling as nude is quite interesting. So when I first took my young boys to top the speeches, they were quite goggle-eyed, and they got over it in about a day. There are cultures in various parts of the world where people do just regularly go around what would get you arrested in London. Scandinavian countries have a sauna culture. is the new normal going to be that people see this stuff and it just stops being a thing? You know, you've seen everyone you might plausibly see naked, and it's, well, they're naked, yeah, there's another naked person, you know. It's just like being on the beach. Well, is there a chance that we just end up in that, where people simply can't be bothered to watch reskinned versions of people? It's just boring.
I think I'll just jump in because there are two immediate points that come to mind. One is context. So I think, for example, we all on a beach find that to be expected, but then walking down the Strand, which ironically means beach.
It was,
yeah. Maybe walking down outside would find that different. And so I think, going back to the point Matan made earlier about how these are all technologies that are used in local contexts, in culture contexts, also in linguistic contexts, which we've not talked about today, but how much of AI is in English, for example, and in Chinese. So I think that's one sort of point. And I think, did you want to say this?
Yeah, well, no, I think you're very right. And I think there's a question of two things. So I think there's a question of seeing and being seen. I think there's an important distinction to draw between a culture in which nudity is normalized because people opt to walk around naked, and a culture in which nudity, the possibility that other people might be viewing you nude without your knowledge. Like, you can choose to take your top off and you are then nude to the world and it's an opt-in process. Whereas if someone is reskinning you as an AI nude, inferred from your bodily movements, you haven't opted into that. I think there's a really crucial distinction, because whether or not you think that nudity is a problem, that is a separate conversation to whether someone might feel that they have been violated if someone's chosen to view them nude without their knowledge or permission. The other thing is, the upshot of my talk and what I think about is I'm skeptical that there's even going to be a new normal, because what we're fundamentally talking about is people being able to construct and customize, individualize normals. And I think for some people, it will seem pretty normal to walk around in a version of the world where everyone is nude.
There'll be three, won't there? There'll be, I've chosen to be nude, you've seen me as nude, but I don't know. And then there's the one that really will feel violation, which is, I know you've seen me nude.
Yeah, but again, if you never find out, have your rights been violated?
And if they make me look nicer, because frankly, not with people queuing up to see me naked is depressingly short these days.
That's not going to be up to you, sadly.
If I could also add an analytical dimension to this discussion, I think that my bottom line is that it doesn't necessarily have to have an end solution. And we've seen all kinds of paradoxes that came up here in different ways. I found it incredible that this guy who tries to avoid surveillance and profiling by any cost is installing in his own house a surveillance system. Yeah? So all of this kind of brought me to thinking, who is much of the debate here, and as well, of course, with the personal and other kind of relationships. So much of the debate is who is the author. Who we kind of all the time we got back in this entire panel to thinking that somebody must control the data, and that the data must go somewhere. Yeah. But reality is much more fluid. So if you think about the way that this guy was thinking about profiling, and so for him it would have been okay. He thinks about himself as a benevolent kind of surveyor, and then we think about Google as a malicious surveyor, or and so on. But the fact is that maybe we should not necessarily have to focus on a single author, but come to terms with the fact that these things are a bit more distributed and a bit more decentralized, much along the lines of the analogy to imagination. Yeah? So what would be the difference? Yeah? And that
later on I would like to comment a little bit, if I have time, also on the whole notion of post-truth and that stuff, and deep fake and all that, but that's a little bit for later. Just I wanted to intervene into this discussion by just asking, why do we assume that there must be a single author and that there are rights that are associated with that author? Which is one of the assumptions in risk, risk analysis and the AI Act and all the legislation that comes up with it. Because there is an entity that is described as the owner always, but maybe one of the solutions would say that there is nobody who is an owner. Somebody mentioned gender here. I will finish with this and then we can go to the next question. But now today there is the whole thing about what do you call it? Multi-binary, a-binary. Yeah. So a-binary, and today I spoke with a person and she told me, yeah, there was a guy that told me he's a-binary and he wanted to be referred to in the plural. And she tried to do it all the time, but then she slipped one time and called him a he instead of a they. And they got really pissed off. They really were like, as if she was doing it on purpose. And she said, no, I am from a different generation. It's not like I need to turn my mind around it. It's not deliberate. But the point, the analytical point, is that we now live in a world in which the notion of identity and rights has been encapsulated so much, not just in a group, like you talk about ethnic echo chamber, but also inside the individual, him, her, or they themselves, who can actually demand from others to prescribe a particular reality to the reality that they conceive of to be truthful. Yeah, and you could say, well, what does it matter? You can. That's what I think Robbie said. You can decide that you are one or the other or both, and so on. But then the question is, where are you going to demand a response from the entire public sphere that would align itself with your own perception of reality? I'm not saying that there is an answer to that. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up as an analytical point for discussion, which I think AI and augmented reality and all these new forms of play are really like radicalizing to the edge. Sorry, I took too long.
If I could just add one tiny point, because I think it might be of interest to the room. I think because there's a very specific kind of, there's been a lot of different ideas across history about identity and also the rights afforded. So for example, in like Roman times, you had the right to vote if you were a citizen, which meant you owned property, and then so there were loads of different formulations of identity. Something that came up to me last week was identity and ethics. I was having to do an ethics form, of which there are many, at UCL, and I was being asked about the ethics of the people I was doing research with, and then a student asked me, well, have you got consent from the AI? I don't know. I mean, I haven't asked the AI, I don't know. So even that, AI isn't currently afforded sort of the legal, at least in our system, sort of rights of a person, but that may also change.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Sorry. I think that about the ownership. Oh, sorry. I think that part about the ownership also relates a lot to our comfortability with uncertainty and past certainty, because we somehow, when we ask for the ownership, when we ask something to be, so to say, regulated or pass the responsibility to someone or something else, then we somehow tend to quest that certainty, which somehow raises the question, where is the balance between being uncertain and being certain on the other hand side?
Yeah. Just saying on the identity thing, I think if you are a non-binary person and you can ask the world to acknowledge that part of your reality and ask the world to identify you in that way, you can't necessarily project that identity outwards to the extent that it's imposed upon other people. And I think ultimately the upshot of augmented reality is that you might be able to ask the world to acknowledge that part of your reality, but you can't control what other people choose to say about you. You might also be about to lose control over how other people choose to see you and perceive you altogether, whether that's in terms of what your body looks like inside their wearable system, or even about, you know, what kinds of, how they curate you into their version of the world. And so as identity kind of, you know, it becomes vitally, it's never less important, but it's also more, not more malleable, but it's more subjective, both from the inside and from the outside, which, again, I think we're going to get difficult precedent-setting cases and people are going to get really hurt.
So Rob. Great. 2 more questions there. Wait, there was a guy before you, sorry. But
it's the same point.
All right.
Respond to Rob. That's an assumption you're making. It's going to take a platform provider 10 minutes to offer an option for someone to pay to have the image of their choice projected to those who see them on the same platform.
Fair point, but as long as that person has opted into that platform, you can also homebrew this technology relatively easily. So although you might be able to define how you're viewed by others using the same system, the same way that you can opt in to wear a skin in Fortnite, and that's then viewed as the same skin by everyone else playing Fortnite, you have absolutely no control over somebody using different hardware or using homebrew hardware or using a different ecosystem. Plus, if you're going into a world which, if you're buying a product which promises you a customized reality, but it also says you are forced to view other people the way they choose to be viewed and you can't customize that, there will be rival products which say, no, you can view other people however you want. If you want to choose to view certain people as orcs, go for it. So yes, I agree, but whether the marketplace is going to support the individual's right to be seen or the individual's right to see is a question.
I think we're talking a lot about individualism, but one of the points in my fieldwork is also that it's relational, because children might opt in to access certain sites, but their parents can block the site using a digital surveillance app. So there are power relations involved when parents might be wanting to care for their kids in terms of what content they can see online. But children have their own views as well. The family that I mentioned that use Alexa in multiple parts of the household, you know, the child, she was very keen to monitor her friends in real time and found this really important. Her mother wasn't totally fond of this idea, but the mother was also using AI to say, dinner's ready, so she didn't have to shout too much. But, you know, there are different perspectives of surveillance. The son was not particularly keen on monitoring his friends in real time. He was quite critical of that. Didn't want to share his location. But to think about a relational approach in which parents can sometimes control what their children can see online, what content they can access, even if they have to approve it themselves.
Yeah, good point. There was first you, yeah, and then you.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, just want to give a shout out to Ethan Zuckerman's, UMass Amherst. He's suing Meta for the right, based on the same principle as parental filters and things like that, to have like user side kind of a layer to over platforms. Anyway, you can read about that. But just a question about two things. One is about like this focus on nudity as like the line. It seems. Just wondering, are we kind of missing more? For example, dignify. There's like dignify spelled with AI instead of Y. Currently used mostly by trad cats, but could all theoretically be used by Salafi Muslims or Orthodox Jews or something like that if they want to put clothes on people, like skin people with more clothes on, possibly even like full head face coverings and everything. Is that a violation? Conversely, it could be like someone not skinning someone as nude, but just like taking a nun's habit off or a hijabi's head covering off or something like that. I mean, is that also like possibly a violation as well? Is nudity where we're drawing the line? And the other thing I wanted to ask was like social proof, like involuntary social proof. Say advertisers skinning people like exactly the same as they are, but with like their brand of shoes or their brand of sunglasses or things like that. Again, like, is there something like can you opt in as a user? Yeah, thank you.
Great questions. I don't have answers. I think the question of how much right we have over how we are seen by others is about to become very, very vexed. I think it's a tawdry example compared to like the potential for real harm in the hijabi example or the nudity examples. But it was a while ago. But if anyone remembers Fatboy Slim's first album, the cover image had a guy who had a big guy with a t-shirt that said, "I'm number one, so why bother?" It's a great statement. And it was a massively selling album, multi-platinum. And the person later sued Fatboy Slim and the record company, saying, "Well, I should get residuals because I'm part of the cover art, and the cover art is part of the success of the album, and it's, you know, it's me. How dare you?" And as I believe this is correct, the record company won and the guy didn't get a cent because they argued that because he appeared to be smiling at the camera, that counted as tacit consent for the photo to have been taken, and thus he had waived all rights to any potential profit from commercial exploitation of the photo. I think that's right. That seems like a pretty crude ruling in what actually I think now is becoming a way, way more complicated issue. But ultimately, a lot of what you're talking about, the other dimension is that that sort of augmentation of other people's identity could be happening in the privacy of a system which someone may have built for themselves, or that they might be relying on the platform that they're using, holding their data private. Because I also wouldn't want other people to have access to my perceptual model of the world. Is that protected data as well? Is that covered by the same argument that, well, if I just imagined somebody, the nun without their habits, if I just imagined them, that would be no harm. So there's no equivalent harm in happening in the privacy of my system.
It is interesting how quickly though we all resort to talking either through the modality of law or capital. So the thing is, the sort of meta patterns we're all still very much within. Right? We're going to see a very new capitalism emerging.
Order. I will take 5 minutes extra. I'm sorry about this, but I would like to allow people to bring up their question, and then we can continue this in there is a wine reception right here. You can just follow us. So there is wine, some olives, and yeah, we can continue there. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the lectures and seminars. I really appreciate it. So I'm coming from a more personal perspective that I'm a person that, from the traditional sense, I never used any VR, AR technology. This is my first smartphone because my father is worried about me. When I traveled abroad to study, I used to use a Sony flip phone. And I didn't do it intentional, it's just because just the way of my life. And I'm interested into gender-based violence studies. And one of the things when AI technology comes upon, it reflects a lot of similar things like technology. You used to see people tap into your personal emotions or surveillance tapes when you're a police investigating. You have polygraph. And those is very special cases, special people who can use it with technology. But AI seems to allow these special cases quite general now. You say there's workplace surveillance of emotions. And I'm from Hong Kong, and in China, there's facial recognition of if you are focusing on your work, or you are actually using working hours as a labor thief, sort of. You can actually see, okay, she's focusing or he's focusing, and then you'll be deduct how many cents out of your salary. I will fact check that, but I saw some videos and documentaries about it. So one thing from my perspective, a person does not tap into the AI world is how generalized this is. And then it affects our world. I would say there's a distinct line from my perspective if it's me and AI. What I feel like is that AI is kind of integrating into my world, facilitating new behaviors. Like in the VR set, there's a study about meta world, the VR. There's a chat room game. You put on VR and then you go into the chat room. One behavior found is that female player immediately get harassed within 30 seconds. And that is unbelievable from my point of view. Is that it seems like this type of technology gives new criminal inclined behavior in a new world with new rules or no rules. It's like a new type of thing coming up. And then how would you, from your point of view, that we would defend the world between AI and human world, or AI-infused human world? Or do you think that, one thing I believe that we should not do something just because we can. maybe it's a really bad kind of thinking, but do you think we should ban sort of, should we find the line said, okay, emotions, human thought, we should not try to tap into that, because that is something unique about human, because, or AI could not actually get into human, because there's technologies reflect, like saying that you could map your brain scan from knowing what I'm thinking, but that's not really your mind, because it's a representation, it's just like language as well, but in image form. So do you think we should map that line, or do you think it's possible? Sorry, it's so long.
No, thanks a lot. While you're answering, there is another guy here, and after this will you come to speak with us in the reception here, sure, and then we can finish more discussion. I'm sorry, I will just pass the time. Yeah.
I actually assumed, to be honest, that might, I'm not supposed to be on the spot, but I thought that sounds like a very mad question.
Yeah. I can try to Matt, would you like to respond to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but in terms of the meta example that you gave, and not wishing to pick on a particular company, but that's then like the duality of surveillance that I was kind of touching upon. So at the moment you have a situation where those accounts are relatively anonymous, so the harassment problem that you talked about, and with perhaps like more pervasive surveillance and then tying that to an individual's identity, there would be more real-world repercussions, which would lead to better behaviour because of the real-world consequences for that behaviour. In terms of like the workplace situation, I kind of touched on that in my talk. I don't think that's where personally taking a Western view. It's where I would want to be, because I think there are harms upon the individual and general teamwork if you think that people are constantly looking over your shoulder, virtually or in reality. And personally, I don't believe that's how you get the best out of people in terms of creativity and imagination and just commitment to their task. I think there are much better ways of motivating people.
If I can just respond to this quickly, and then we go to the last question. I think that beyond the question of singularity and multiplicity, like this idea of identity and who can decide who is owning the data and so on, there's a very big question of the play between artificiality, it's called artificial intelligence, and authenticity. And I think that the line that you're talking about comes from a perspective in which there is a certain distinction, which is kind of more or less clear between artificial and authentic. However, the kinds of things that Rob was talking about, and the kind of things that were personified in the Star Trek from my childhood, hundreds of years ago. For example, there was an android there that was called Data. Yeah, funny enough. Yeah. So Data was kind of sometimes kind of weird, quirkily funny, and doing kind of geeky jokes and stuff. And but he looked and felt like a human being. So these kind of things that were science fiction are no longer science fiction, and I'm pretty sure that quite soon there will be real androids also like that. How much we could tell the difference between person and artificial, I'm not sure. I guess maybe that's only in the far future. But in any case, what the 3D dimension, what it does, it serves to create an authenticity to the artificiality. In Stanley Kubrick's film, you could see that it is artificial. HAL is artificial because it's two-dimensional, it doesn't have a body, and it is kind of distant from the world by a very clear line that you're talking about. I think the interesting thing about it is that when the line is blurred and ultimately cancelled, you get new types of artificiality and authenticity that is becoming a question of context rather than a meta kind of decision in the law or in a society and so on. And one of the things that I exemplify this amazingly, which I've never thought about before, was your thing about the merging of big data into singularized persons, So, but they are not real. They're not real They're artificial, but they're authentic. You know, and they're authentic enough for us to speak with them in a mirror, in our phone, and like really feel better about ourselves. Yes, please.
Hello. So.
And then we'll finish. I'm sorry that I've taken 10 minutes more.
I've had time to like kind of shorten my question. So, first observation. Well, first, thank you all for your wonderful talks. Very dynamic and engaging. So my first observation is that like widespread XR, AR, and VR is more going to be an inevitability rather than theory. However, there's probably one theoretical thing that I kind of realized that might come from this. So if XR is a dynamic, programmable, virtual reality, there actually might become a point where that leads to a dynamic, programmable, physical reality. As in, you're not just viewing someone naked. If you had the power and the control, you could put clothes on them, or like an outfit or whatever. Well, there's a whole Pandora's box for that. I don't want to get to the size of it. But the real question is that, like, how do we raise an entirely new generation of scientists, people, so that when they have the power to make that technology, they don't use it to suddenly just conjure up cages, like kind of ropes to like tie people up, or like, you know, I know that this is a bit too far off, but with 3D printing, swarm robots, like material sciences, 60 years later, 100 years later, this won't be science fiction. So what do you say for that, or for the future?
I think that the rich and powerful people have always had an outsized ability to customize reality already and to determine how reality runs. I think the danger of, because I agree that these XR technologies, especially powered by AI, are an inevitability of one kind or another. But I think the real danger is if those technologies just end up making powerful people more powerful and having greater influence over reality, and further marginalizing marginalized people. AR ultimately is the promise of being able to leave each other notes in the margins of reality, but there's a great risk that it'll be monopolized by powerful people who can push marginalized people further into the margins of their own reality. Which kind of, person at the back asked, you asked a great question, and it deserves an answer, even though I don't have one. But like, should we legislate this, and should we legislate reality? Should we legislate some things being real and some things being perceptual, or levels of control? It's a really hard one. It certainly seems like if the current business in AI at Salman Altman being back in, it certainly seems that the kind of barrel ahead, let's find out what AI is for, guys have won the war compared to the AI doomers. I can't remember what that side of the argument is called. Should we legislate against this stuff? Should we find a way to control people's level of power over not just their personal reality, but over other people's realities? We haven't had a lot of success at that as a species. And I think we need a bit of a rethink in terms of where people's rights begin and end, and does that end outside your own skin, or do those rights extend to within other people, and how they perceive you, or the level of physical control they might be able to have over you.
Yeah. Anybody else would like to comment, or just finish it?
Just because I wasn't being rude, I was desperately trying to think of a book that I read recently, which is all about technology containment, and that probably kind of referring to, which is, if we're not pushing ahead with it, if one party isn't pushing ahead with it, the concern is that someone else is. And so I definitely recommend reading The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman, which really kind of highlights why AI, particularly, or more broadly software, is such a problem to contain in the way that you kind of described it there. So with, I think the only example he could look at in terms of the history of human technology development was nuclear weapons, where we've been reasonably successful at containing that, because it's horrendously complex and expensive to develop, and that has largely succeeded. But in a world where you can spin up language models on Hugging Face, or train your own variants of that, I really don't see it's going to be possible, as much as we might want to do that in some form.
All right, so to finalize, first please, if you could all evaluate, it's very important for the festival, they learn new things. real humans learn things from this. So if you could please do that. And I will finish just with one sentence, returning to what I described as a dilemma, or like, you know, what you do with HAL-like or prototypical kind of mimesis, an imitation of intelligence within artificiality. I just wanted to focus again on this issue of observing, this issue of looking at things, and several of the slides here were really kind of quite amazingly showing this idea of the self-looking other, and looking at the other, and the other looking at the self, but also the self looking at itself. And I think that when you speak about AI and surveillance, there is no doubt that it's going to become an integral part of our life. We did not talk about truth and post-truth. I'll be happy to do it over a while. But just to kind of leave you with this idea of around the notion of control, there is always this question about who is watching, who is, what kind of things are being detected, and what is the agency that is looking. Claire called it power relations, for example, and I don't think that at the moment there is any concrete answer to this. I think that surveillance studies, which is a big thing already for a few decades, are only beginning to deal with this this notion and the introduction and adoption, mass adoption of AI. And I think that it's a very interesting topic to keep up alive. So I would just encourage you to talk about it with your families over dinner, and write blogs and write stuff, because I think that public debate is more important than, you know, closed room academic kind of very, very smart theories, because theories eventually needs to be pragmatized and need to come up to the real world. And I think that that's actually a very important thing to do in the near future. So we have wine in the, you can just follow us, wine and some snacks, and we can talk more there. Thank you very much for coming, all the best. And thanks, of course, for all the panelists. Amazing, amazing work.
Thank you, Matan.
Yeah, thank you.